Hey there, tonight we're diving into the decidedly less glamorous medieval New Year, where what you're about to discover is a world where fasting sometimes trumped feasting and forgotten traditions make the modern countdown look like a mundane affair. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The medieval calendar was like a medieval tavern brawl, chaotic, unpredictable, and everyone had a different idea of what was going on. If you think keeping track of today's holidays is tough with all those apps and notifications, try juggling the medieval concept of New Year, where the start date was as steady as a drunk knight on a three-legged stool. Thanks to the Julian calendar, folks had more New Year's dates than a medieval minstrel had ballads, and it wasn't just about getting the party started, it had serious economic implications. Now, the Julian calendar, bless its antiquated heart, was introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BC. It aimed to tidy up the Roman calendar chaos, but it didn't account for leap years properly. This oversight slowly drifted the calendar off course. By the Middle Ages, this drift had Europe beginning the new year at various times, from March 25th to December 25th, depending on whether you asked a pope, a king, or the local baker. March 25th, also known as Lady Day, no, not Lady Gaga Day, but the Feast of the Annunciation, was a particular favorite for starting the year. Why? It wasn't just a religious preference, it had a lot to do with money. March 25th was a tax collector's dream. It marked the end of winter and the beginning of the agricultural year. When you're living in a medieval society where farming is akin to breathing, starting the year with the planting season makes perfect sense. It was also convenient for tax purposes. Collecting taxes on land and agricultural produce just as the fields were being sown was like taking candy from a baby, if the baby was a medieval peasant and the candy was half of their hard-earned crops. So, imagine you're a medieval peasant, not too hard, considering most of us would have been. You've just survived another winter without freezing to death or being eaten by wolves. Huzzah! But before you can enjoy the spring sunshine, you must pay up. Coincidence? Hardly. March 25th was strategically placed, aligning the economic rhythm of medieval life with the church calendar for maximum efficiency. Peasants paid their dues, while nobles and clergy filled their coffers, ensuring everyone had a stake in maintaining this curious calendar arrangement. Meanwhile, in the noble courts, the decision of when New Year begins was more about prestige than practicality. Some regions favored January 1st, aligning with the Roman tradition, and eventually the Gregorian calendar reform in 1582. Nobles embraced January 1st as a sign of sophistication, a way to flex their cultural muscles. But if you were a peasant, you probably didn't care much whether the new year started in January or March, as long as there was enough food to keep you alive through another cycle of seasons. Speaking of cycles, the church had its own logic, often using December 25th as the start of the ecclesiastical year. This date was a nod to the birth of Christ, doubling up on festivities and ensuring a holy start to the year. However, let's not forget the church's strategic ploys. Starting the year with a major religious holiday kept the flock in line and the pews filled. The economic implications of these shifting dates were profound. For merchants, aligning their books with the right New Year date was crucial. Imagine trying to balance your accounts when everyone around you insists the year starts on a different day. It was like playing a financial version of musical chairs where the music never stopped and the chairs kept moving. If you think fiscal year confusion is a modern quirk, medieval merchants would beg to differ. They had to juggle multiple calendars, ensuring their ledgers made sense regardless of when the year purportedly began. But it wasn't all taxes and tithes. The new year also brought opportunities for celebration and renewal. Despite the calendar chaos, people found joy in marking time's passage. Feasts and festivities were a welcome distraction from the relentless grind of medieval life. Nobles hosted grand banquets, peasants enjoyed communal gatherings, and everyone took a moment to breathe before diving into another year of toil and survival. It's easy to romanticize the medieval New Year, imagining knights and ladies in resplendent halls, toasting to the future. The reality was far grittier, a tapestry of survival, economics, and spiritual obligation. Yet, even amid the harshness, there was a collective sense of turning the page, of embracing the cyclical nature of life. Each new year, regardless of its start date, was a reminder that time marches on, much like those tax collectors on March 25th, always ready to collect their due. And speaking of turning the page, let's dive into the delicious chaos of a medieval New Year feast. Picture this, a banquet table stretching as long as a medieval tax roll, piled high with a cornucopia of dishes that would make even the most seasoned Instagram foodie swoon. But before you start envisioning a Game of Thrones-esque feast with endless platters of roast meats and exotic fruits, let's ground this scene in the gritty reality of the Middle Ages, where culinary creativity often stemmed from necessity rather than abundance. First up, the star of many a noble feast, the boar's head. Yes, you read that right. The head of a wild boar, complete with tusks, and often garnished with a sprig of rosemary or bay leaves, was the medieval equivalent of a showstopper. It was a symbol of both triumph over the beast and a display of wealth. Hunting a boar wasn't exactly a walk in the park, more like an extreme sport with a side of danger. So, serving its head was as much about boasting your hunting prowess as it was about the actual taste, which was, let's say, an acquired one. If you didn't have a boar at hand, a pig's head would do, but it didn't carry quite the same bragging rights. Accompanying this carnivorous centerpiece was pottage, the medieval all-purpose stew. Think of it as the slow cooker meal before slow cookers were a thing. Pottage was a versatile dish, varying from a thin gruel for peasants to a rich, hearty stew for nobles, depending on the ingredients at hand. It was a bubbling part of whatever was available: vegetables, grains, bits of meat, and simmered for hours to blend flavors. It was the medieval kitchen's answer to waste not, want not. Even the wealthiest households would serve some version of it, a nod to practicality amidst opulence. Now, let's spice things up, literally. Spices were the medieval version of bling, the culinary gold dust that transformed ordinary dishes into something extraordinary. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and especially the coveted saffron were not just flavor enhancers, they were status symbols. Having a spice rack stocked with these exotic goods was like driving a luxury car today. They were expensive, often imported from the East through complex trade routes, and their use signified wealth and sophistication. A pound of saffron could cost as much as a horse, which tells you just how serious medieval folks were about their seasoning. But here's where we bust a common myth. Medieval feasts weren't just non-stop gluttony. While the wealthy did indulge in multi-course meals that could stretch for hours, these extravaganzas were punctuated by fasts and religious observances. The church calendar dictated periods of abstinence, and even during feasts, certain foods were restricted on holy days. Fish often replaced meat, not just as a nod to religious practice, but as a testament to the medieval ingenuity in preserving food. Salted and smoked fish were staples, reliable long before refrigeration became a household word. Speaking of keeping food fresh, let's talk logistics. Imagine trying to preserve the bounty of a feast without the luxury of a fridge. Medieval kitchens relied on a combination of salting, smoking, and drying to extend the life of their delicacies. Salt was the MVP here, acting as both a preservative and a currency of sorts. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, hence the term salary. It was so valuable that wars were fought over it, with the Venetians and the Genoese clashing in the 14th century in the so-called Salt Wars. For meat, the strategy was to store it in cool, dry places, like cellars or specially designed larders, to stave off spoilage. But let's not overlook the piece de resistance of medieval feasts, the subtlety. The word itself sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, and in a way it was. A subtlety, or subtlety, was an edible work of art, often a sculpture made of sugar, marzipan, or pastry, designed to astound and amuse. These were the medieval version of a viral TikTok cake, blending culinary skill with artistic flair. Imagine a life-sized swan crafted from sugar or a castle made of marzipan, served between courses to wow the guests. It was theater on a plate, a testament to the chef's ingenuity and the host's resources. While we might romanticize these feasts as endless banquets of debauchery, The truth was that they were carefully orchestrated events, balancing indulgence with religious observance, taste with practicality. Each dish told a story of its own, from the hunt that brought the boar to the table to the spices that traveled thousands of miles to season it. These feasts were a microcosm of medieval life, a blend of survival and celebration, where every bite was a reminder of the world beyond the banquet hall. As we feast on these historical tidbits, it's clear that the medieval New Year was a time of culinary creativity and cultural expression. The table was a place where status was displayed, alliances were formed, and the year's fortunes were toasted. But don't put down your fork just yet. There's more on the menu. The medieval world was a complex tapestry woven with threads of tradition and innovation, and there are still more layers to uncover as we move forward in our exploration. Stay tuned for the next course in our journey through history. As we peel back the layers of medieval merriment, it's time to shift from feast to fast, a transition as abrupt as a medieval knight switching from a tankard of ale to a pious prayer. Fasting in the Middle Ages was as much a part of the new year as the revelry, a balancing act between indulgence and abstinence that would make a modern-day nutritionist clutch their kale smoothie in disbelief. Fasting wasn't just a solo spiritual journey. It was a communal event, a social contract that bound villages and towns together in a shared experience of deprivation. Sure, it sounds as fun as a root canal, but remember, this was a world where collective participation was the glue holding fractured societies together. The church, wielding more influence than a medieval monarch with a shiny new sword, dictated these periods of fasting with the precision of a Gregorian chant. Advent and Lent were the heavy hitters on the fasting calendar, but the new year had its own mini-fasts sprinkled throughout, leading to a rhythm of feast and famine that kept everyone on their toes, or more accurately on their knees. But let's not paint this picture with too broad a brush. The church's dictates on fasting were riddled with loopholes big enough to drive an ox cart through. Enter the medieval fish market, the unexpected star in this tale of religious rigmarole. You see, while meat was off the menu during fasts, fish was the holy loophole everyone loved to exploit. This wasn't just a culinary preference. It was a minor economic miracle, turning coastal towns into bustling hubs of piscine commerce. The fish markets boomed, with herring and cod becoming the medieval equivalent of Bitcoin, highly sought after, with value fluctuating based on scarcity and season. Fishermen transformed into quasi-celebrities, their catches setting the pace for the market. In places like Yarmouth and Scarborough, fish festivals were more than just local affairs. They were events of economic significance, attracting traders from miles around, all eager to cash in on the fasting frenzy. And let's not forget the logistics of fish preservation, a marvel of medieval ingenuity. With no refrigerators in sight, preservation was key, and salt was the hero of the hour. The Hanseatic League, that powerful confederation of merchant guilds, made a tidy profit transporting salted fish across Europe, ensuring that even landlocked peasants could partake in the fast day loophole. If you ever doubted the power of supply and demand, look no further than the medieval fish market, where fasting days paved the way for a bustling economy of aquatic proportions. Now, one might wonder, did everyone follow these fasting rules to the letter? Let's just say that medieval adherence to fasting was as flexible as a court jester's antics. The wealthy had their ways of bending the rules, using their coffers to procure the finest fish, or even inventing elaborate dishes that technically met the fasting criteria, but would leave a pauper's mouth watering like a medieval soup pot. Meanwhile, the peasants, with fewer resources and fewer options, stuck closer to the prescribed diet, their fasting more a necessity than a choice. Church, in its wisdom, was aware of these shenanigans, but turned a blind eye, choosing to focus on the spirit rather than the letter of the law, except, of course, when it suited them to crack down for the sake of a moral high ground. After all, a little indulgence kept the congregation happy and the coffers full, a pragmatic approach if ever there was one. Which brings us to an important point. Fasting was as much about social control as it was about spiritual purification. By dictating when and how people could eat, the church maintained a grip on daily life, reinforcing its authority in a world where divine and temporal power were as intertwined as the vines in a medieval vineyard. The fasts were a reminder of the church's overarching presence, a divine clock ticking away in the background of everyday life. But let's not dismiss the spiritual aspect entirely. For many, fasting was a genuine act of devotion, a way to cleanse the body and soul, preparing for the year ahead with a sense of renewal. This was a time when faith was the backbone of existence, offering hope in a world often lacking in creature comforts. The act of fasting, therefore, became a form of solidarity, a shared sacrifice that transcended social class, even if only temporarily. As we ponder the paradox of medieval fasting, it's clear that the new year was more than just a date on a calendar. It was a social construct, a tapestry woven from threads of tradition, faith, and economics. Each fast, much like each feast, was a reflection of the complex interplay between human nature and divine decree, a dance that continues to fascinate as we look back through the lens of history. So, as the medieval world turned the page on another year, with fish markets bustling and kitchens quiet, the stage was set for the next chapter in the saga of survival. The cycle of feast and fast, of indulgence and sacrifice, was a testament to the resilience of a society navigating the tides of time with a blend of reverence and resourcefulness. And as we continue our journey into this bygone era, there's much more to explore, from the political intrigues that shaped empires to the everyday lives of those who lived in their shadows. Stay with us as we unravel the threads of history, one fascinating story at a time. As the medieval world rolled into another year, the air was thick with anticipation, and not just from the smell of fishy fasting leftovers. It was a time when traditions, both bizarre and beguiling, took center stage. Let's kick things off with first footing, a custom as quirky as a jester's hat. This tradition dictated that the first person to enter a home after the stroke of midnight would determine the household's luck for the coming year. Preferably, this first-footer was a tall, dark-haired man. Blonde and red-haired visitors were considered bad omens, possibly because they reminded folks of Viking invasions. The rewards for being the first-footer, usually a dram of whiskey or a slice of black bun. Nothing says, Happy New Year, like a door prize of carbs and alcohol, right? But hold the haggis, let's dig deeper. First footing wasn't just about superstition. It reflected the medieval preoccupation with fate and fortune. In a world where life was as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast, the belief that a single person could sway your fortunes for an entire year was both comforting and terrifying. It's a bit like modern folks obsessing over horoscopes, clinging to cosmic predictions to make sense of life's chaos. Speaking of chaos, enter the Mummers plays, a delightfully chaotic tradition that was part theater, part carnival, and all spectacle. Picture this, a troupe of masked performers parading through towns, enacting short plays that mixed folklore, history, and a dash of slapstick comedy. These plays often featured characters like St. George and the Dragon, mingling Christian themes with pagan elements in a medieval mashup that would make even the most jaded Netflix viewer sit up. The real charm of the Mummers plays lay in their ability to turn societal norms on their head. Role reversals were common, with men dressing as women and vice versa, allowing for a temporary suspension of the rigid medieval social order. Think of it as a medieval version of Saturday Night Live, a chance to lampoon authority and poke fun at the establishment, all while wearing a papier-mâché dragon head. It was theater for the masses, as much about participation as performance. Economic context, absolutely. Mummers plays weren't just an exercise in community bonding. They were a chance for the performers to earn a little extra coin. After the performance, the troupe would often pass the hat around, collecting donations from the audience. This was a time when every penny or groat, to be historically accurate, counted, and these seasonal performances offered a welcome respite from the economic grind. As the centuries rolled on, both first footing and Mummers plays began to fade, casualties of a changing world. Industrialization, urbanization, and the relentless march of modernity left little room for such quaint customs. Yet their echoes remain. Today, remnants of first footing can be found in Scottish Hogmanay celebrations, while traces of Mummers plays survive in certain English towns, where local troupes keep the tradition alive, albeit with a modern twist. But let's not romanticize too much. For every cherished tradition, there were others best left behind, like the infamous boy bishop celebrations. Imagine a young boy, usually under 10, elected as bishop for a day, complete with all the ecclesiastical trappings. It was all fun and games, until the Reformation rolled around, and church authorities, never ones for a laugh, deemed it inappropriate to have a child wielding ecclesiastical authority, even in jest. The tradition of the boy bishop, while seemingly light-hearted, underscores the medieval fascination with overturning societal norms, if only temporarily. It was a way for communities to let off steam, a pressure valve in a rigidly hierarchical society. Of course, it also served as a reminder of the tenuous line between sacred and profane, a line that medieval folks loved to dance upon. And let's not skip over the economic implications. The boy bishop celebrations often involved collecting donations for the poor, a medieval blend of charity and entertainment. It was a reminder that even in times of revelry, the needs of the less fortunate were never far from mind, a sobering thought amid the merriment. As we sift through the remnants of these traditions, it's clear they were more than just quaint customs. They were a reflection of the medieval worldview, a kaleidoscope of faith, fear, and festivity. Each practice, from first footing to mummers' plays, offered insight into a society grappling with the uncertainties of life, using ritual as a way to impose order on chaos. Yet, while these traditions may have faded, their spirit lives on in our modern celebrations. The desire to mark the passing of time, to connect with community, and to inject a little magic into the mundane is as potent today as it was centuries ago. So, as we continue our journey through history, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the medieval world, a world where tradition and transformation dance together in a grand, unpredictable waltz. And with that, we turn the page to our next chapter, where we'll delve deeper into the medieval psyche, uncovering the beliefs and superstitions that shaped an era. Stay tuned, because the past is far from done with us. So, as we wade through the murky waters of medieval mindsets, let's confront the elephant in the feasting hall. Why do we cling so fiercely to these romanticized myths of yore? Picture this: the medieval New Year, a tableau of knights in shining armor toasting with goblets of mead under the flickering torchlight. It's a scene straight from a Hollywood set, with all the allure of a fairy tale, and none of the inconvenient truth of dysentery or feudal taxes. But here's the rub. The reality was rarely so picturesque. The medieval New Year was a gritty affair, a blend of economic necessity, religious obligation, and the relentless grind of survival. Yet, we insist on airbrushing history, turning it into a sepia-toned nostalgia fest. Why? Because the past, much like a medieval tapestry, is easier to digest when it's woven with threads of fantasy. We sanitize and romanticize, not out of malice, but because it comforts us with the illusion of simpler times. It's like preferring the Instagram-filtered version of history, complete with cheery peasants and benevolent lords, over the unvarnished truth of toil and tithes. But let's peel back the layers of this historical onion, teary eyes and all. Take the myth of the chivalrous knight, for instance. The reality: knights were less about courtly love and more about cold, hard cash. Becoming a knight required serious investment. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of buying a luxury SUV. You needed the horse, the armor, the weaponry, and let's not forget the training. A suit of armor alone could set you back 40 shillings, a small fortune when the average peasant might earn a shilling a month. And for what? To serve your lord in exchange for land and status, a transactional relationship dressed up in the glittering guise of chivalry. Yet we persist in idolizing them as paragons of virtue and romance, conveniently ignoring the bloodstains beneath the polish. Then there's the notion of endless feasting and merriment, a medieval party that never stops. The truth was more sobering. For most, the New Year was marked by stark contrasts, feasts interspersed with fasts, abundance shadowed by scarcity. The common folk, who made up the bulk of the population, were more familiar with the gnawing pangs of hunger than the indulgence of a banquet. Sure, there were celebrations, but these were punctuated by the harsh reality of subsistence farming and the whims of weather. A bad harvest could mean the difference between a full larder and an empty belly. Yet, the myth of the never-ending feast persists, a tantalizing fantasy of a simpler, more joyful past, free from the complexities of modern life. So why do we cling to these myths like a medieval lord clutches his purse? Because they offer us a narrative, a story in which we can find comfort and escape. They allow us to gloss over the unpleasant bits, to romanticize struggle as noble and hardship as heroic. It's a coping mechanism as old as time itself, a way to make sense of a world that is often harsh and unforgiving. We want to believe in the good old days, even if those days were more plague-ridden than perfect. Yet, amid the myths, some traditions have quietly slipped through the cracks of time, adapting and evolving into the celebrations we know today. Take the concept of first footing, which has morphed into the New Year's Eve tradition of welcoming the new year with open doors and open hearts, or consider the communal aspect of medieval feasts, which echoes in our modern gatherings, where food and fellowship remain at the core of celebration. Even the idea of a New Year's resolution has its roots in medieval penitence, where turning over a new leaf was both a spiritual and social endeavor. These enduring practices remind us that while the myth may embellish, the essence of human nature remains constant. We are creatures of habit, drawn to rituals that offer a semblance of control over the chaos of life. Whether it's a medieval feast or a modern New Year's party, the desire to mark time's passage with ceremony and camaraderie is a testament to our shared humanity. In the end, the medieval New Year, with all its contradictions and complexities, offers a mirror to our own times. It challenges us to look beyond the romantic veneer, to acknowledge the grit and graft beneath the grandeur. It invites us to embrace both the legend and the reality, understanding that history is not a fairy tale, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience. So, as we bid farewell to the medieval world and its myriad myths, let's carry forward the lessons learned. That the past, while imperfect, is a vital part of our collective story, a reminder of where we've been and where we might yet go. And with that, dear listeners, we close the book on this chapter of history. But fear not, for the past is never truly behind us. It lingers in the customs we uphold, the stories we tell, and the myths we cherish. As we forge ahead into the future, let us do so with eyes wide open, ready to unravel the mysteries of history, one tale at a time. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, history is not just about what happened, but why it matters. Cheers to that, and to all the stories yet to be told. In the grand tapestry of history, few figures seem as caught in the crossfire of fate and politics as Empress Myeongseong. Born into a family that was more average noble than dazzling dynasty, her path to the Korean throne wasn't exactly paved with gold, more like a rocky road with a few pearls thrown in for good measure. She was born in 1851, during the Joseon dynasty's twilight years, a time when Korea was doing its best impression of a hermit crab, clinging to isolation while the world around it was changing at a dizzying pace. Now, the Joseon dynasty wasn't just any old dynasty. It was a 500-year-old institution that could teach courses in Confucianism and stubbornness. By the time Myeongseong came on the scene, it was like your favorite old uncle who refuses to update his flip phone, resistant to change and proud of it. But even the most tradition-bound systems have their quirks, and the Joseon court was no exception. Empress Myeongseong, or Min Ya-yong as she was known before her marriage, was thrust into this world at the tender age of 16 when she married King Gajong in 1866. Let's pause to appreciate the political climate of the time. Korea was sandwiched between China, still clinging to the Qing dynasty, and Japan, which had just popped the cork on the Meiji Restoration, modernizing faster than a caffeinated rabbit. The rest of the world wasn't just sitting around either. The Western powers were having a colonial shopping spree across Asia. Yet, the Joseon dynasty was less interested in global affairs and more preoccupied with internal squabbles, primarily between the ruling Min and Kim clans. Think of it as a Game of Thrones episode, but with more Confucian scholars and fewer dragons. Myeongseong, with her keen intellect and political savvy, quickly became a power player in the court. She wasn't just a pretty face in a hanbok, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her marriage to Gajong initially made her a mere consort, but she was determined not to be a footnote in history. She had her eyes on the crown, and she wasn't about to let tradition, or the patriarchy, dampen her ambition. Court life, as you might imagine, was a circus of etiquette, rituals, and bureaucracy. Picture a place where you needed a manual just to know which bow to use when greeting the king. It wasn't all bad, though. The palace had its perks. For one, you could indulge in the finest silks and feast on delicacies like gujialpan, a 9-section dish that was the 19th century version of a charcuterie board, but with more artistic flair. Yet, beneath the surface, the palace was a pressure cooker of intrigue and power plays, with factions plotting like it was an Olympic sport. Myeongseong navigated these turbulent waters with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Her political acumen was matched only by her ability to charm or outwit those around her. She saw the writing on the wall. Korea needed to modernize to survive. She understood that clinging to isolationism was as futile as trying to hold water in a sieve. But the old guard at court wasn't so sure about this whole modernization thing. They preferred their Joseon the way they liked their tea, steeped in tradition. But let's not romanticize her rise too much. Myeongseong's ascent was as much about survival as it was about ambition. The royal court was a hotbed of intrigue, where alliances shifted faster than a Korean drama plot twist. Myeongseong had to be as adaptable as she was strategic. Her ability to maneuver through court politics was legendary, and she did so while maintaining the delicate balance of power between the Min and Kim factions. Her husband, King Gajang, might have been the monarch, but Myeongseong was the one pulling the strings behind the curtain. As Korea's geopolitical landscape began to change, Myeongseong saw the need to strengthen the country's position on the world stage. She was keenly aware of the threat posed by Japan's growing influence, a threat that many in the court dismissed as distant thunder. But Myeongseong was no Cassandra, doomed to be ignored. She was a woman on a mission. She advocated for modernization, recognizing that Korea's survival depended on its ability to adapt to the new world order. In her early years at court, Myeongseong's wit and intelligence helped her forge alliances with key players, both within and outside the palace walls. She was a master of diplomacy, able to navigate the labyrinth of court politics with skill and grace. Her ability to see the bigger picture was one of her greatest strengths, allowing her to position herself and her country strategically in the face of mounting challenges. The rituals of the Joseon court, while often absurd, provided Myeongseong with a stage on which to demonstrate her capabilities. She understood the importance of ceremony and tradition in maintaining the delicate balance of power, but she also knew when to bend the rules in her favor. Her political savvy was matched by her ability to adapt to changing circumstances, ensuring that she remained a key player in the court's ever-shifting dynamics. As we wrap up this first act of Empress Myeongseong's life, let's leave her on the cusp of greatness. A young woman in a man's world, ready to defy conventions and challenge the status quo. The stage is set for her rise to power, and the world, whether it knows it or not, is about to feel the impact of her legacy. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into her story, exploring the triumphs and tragedies that would define her reign. In the unfolding drama of Myeongseong's reign, one might say the plot thickened like a well-stirred jiggy. Her rise wasn't just a case of a savvy woman outmaneuvering court conservatives. It was a full-blown political symphony, with Myeongseong as the maestro. Let's dig into her early rule, which was as much about building bridges as it was about burning them. Myeongseong had a knack for turning the staid rituals of the Joseon court into her personal chessboard. Her sharp intellect and political dexterity soon became the stuff of legend, much to the consternation of the court's old guard, who weren't exactly thrilled about a woman outsmarting them at their own game. But let's not sugarcoat it. Her cunning didn't win her any popularity contests. The conservatives, with their dreams of maintaining the status quo, viewed her as a meddlesome upstart. Her efforts to push Korea toward modernization were essential but controversial. Imagine trying to sell the benefits of a newfangled steam engine to folks who still think the ox cart is the pinnacle of technology. Yet Myeongseong was undeterred. She recognized that Korea couldn't remain a Confucian museum piece while the rest of the world whizzed by on bullet trains. In the 1870s, Myeongseong began championing reforms that would drag Korea, kicking and screaming, into the modern age. She knew that Korea's survival depended on its ability to adapt to new realities. However, modernization wasn't just about embracing new technologies. It was also about shaking up the power structures within the court. Myeongseong's efforts to modernize the military, for instance, were met with resistance from traditionalists who preferred their soldiers as they were, loyal, underpaid, and under-equipped. Her alliances were as strategic as a game of baddock, reached out to foreign powers, much like a master negotiator playing a complex hand of cards. But these alliances were as much about survival as they were about strategy. She understood that Korea was a small fish in a pond filled with sharks, and she wasn't about to let the likes of Japan or China swallow her country whole. Myeongseong's diplomacy was a balancing act, keeping Korea's options open while preventing any single power from gaining too much influence. Speaking of Japan, Myeongseong's relationship with this rising power was fraught with tension. The Meiji Restoration had turned Japan into a powerhouse, and they weren't shy about flexing their newfound muscles. In 1876, the Treaty of Ganghwa was signed, essentially forcing Korea to open its doors to Japanese trade. Myeongseong, however, wasn't one to roll over. She recognized the treaty for what it was, a thinly veiled attempt at domination, and began seeking ways to counterbalance Japan's influence. China, on the other hand, was a different kettle of fish. The Qing dynasty was eager to maintain its suzerainty over Korea, but was itself struggling with internal turmoil. Myeongseong skillfully played the two giants against each other, a diplomatic high-wire act that kept Korea's independence intact, at least for the time being. Her savvy maneuvering was akin to dancing on a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster, but with the grace of a seasoned performer. The economic context of Myeongseong's reign was equally complex. Korea's economy was largely agrarian, and the idea of industrialization was as foreign as a Martian invasion. Myeongseong, with her visionary outlook, saw the potential for economic growth through modernization. However, persuading the court and the country that change was necessary proved a Herculean task. Resistance came not just from the conservatives at court, but also from a populace wary of the unknown. But let's not get too romantic about her reformist zeal. Myeongseong had her share of missteps and miscalculations. Her efforts to increase central power often clashed with regional governors, who were reluctant to cede authority to the throne. This tension would later prove to be one of the many fault lines in her reign. Like any good strategist, she knew that power was a double-edged sword, and wielding it effectively required more than just ambition. It required a deft touch and a keen understanding of human nature. Myeongseong's early reign was a whirlwind of reform and resistance, diplomacy and intrigue. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics was nothing short of remarkable. She was a woman in a man's world, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Yet her legacy was not just about her accomplishments, but also about the challenges she faced. Her story is a testament to the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be constrained by the limitations of her time. As we continue our journey through her life, keep in mind that Myeongseong's tale is far from over. The stage is set for more intrigue and drama, with alliances to be forged and enemies to be reckoned with. Her story is a reminder that history is never a straight line, but a series of twists and turns, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned, because the next act promises to be just as riveting as the last. But as the curtain rises on Myeongseong's reign at its zenith, let's talk about how this Empress wasn't just playing politics. She was practically rewriting the playbook. You see, in the late 19th century, Korea was at a crossroads that would make any GPS throw up its hands in confusion. Myeongseong, however, was determined to steer this ship through the typhoon, even if it meant getting a bit of seawater in her handbag. At the heart of her reforms was the Garbo Reform, a series of sweeping changes that began in the 1890s, aimed at yanking Korea out of its feudal slumber and thrusting it into the modern age. These reforms were the equivalent of trying to install a new operating system on a computer that's still running on DOS. The reforms included abolishing the class system, establishing a new postal service, and even introducing Western-style education. Imagine the shock for those accustomed to a society where Confucian ideals reigned supreme, and suddenly they're being asked to write essays on Western politics. Yet, Myeongseong's vision was met with resistance from those who saw modernization as nothing more than a gateway drug to Western imperialism. The conservatives weren't exactly lining up to get on board with these changes. They viewed her initiatives with all the enthusiasm of a cat faced with a bath. But Myeongseong understood that for Korea to survive, it couldn't just be a museum of Confucian values. It needed to evolve, adapt, and yes, even embrace some of those Western ideas that seemed so alien at the time. Economically, Korea was about as diverse as a monochrome painting. It was an agrarian society, where rice wasn't just a staple, it was practically the currency. The idea of industrialization was as foreign as a Martian landing at Gyeongbokgung Palace. Myeongseong's push for economic reform was ambitious, aiming to diversify Korea's economy beyond its agricultural roots. She sought to encourage trade, improve infrastructure, and attract foreign investment, which was a bit like trying to sell ice to Eskimos when the local nobility had all their wealth tied up in rice paddies. And then there were the social challenges. Myeongseong initiated changes aimed at improving women's rights, a move that likely caused more than a few monocles to drop into their owner's tea. In a society where women's roles were traditionally limited to the domestic sphere, this was about as radical as you could get. But Myeongseong was nothing if not pragmatic. She knew that empowering half the population wasn't just a matter of fairness, it was common sense. Of course, every great reformer inevitably faces backlash, and Myeongseong was no exception. The political landscape was a minefield, and she was navigating it with the grace of a prima ballerina, albeit one with a target on her back. The backlash wasn't just domestic. International tensions were a constant thorn in her side. Japan, in particular, was watching Korea with the gleeful anticipation of a cat watching a canary. They had their eyes on Korea, and they weren't exactly subtle about it. Domestically, the aristocracy was less than thrilled about their status quo being upended. For them, Myeongseong's reforms were akin to an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of their power. The conservative factions, with their dreams of maintaining the old order, saw Myeongseong not as a visionary, but as a threat. And let's not forget the regional governors who weren't too keen on ceding authority to the central government. They liked their power decentralized. Thank you very much. Myeongseong's diplomatic juggling act with China and Japan was a spectacle worthy of a tightrope walker. Her efforts to balance the influence of these two giants were nothing short of remarkable. China, struggling with its own internal issues, was eager to maintain its suzerainty over Korea, while Japan, with its newfound industrial might, was chomping at the bit to expand its influence. Myeongseong's strategy was to play them against each other, a move that kept Korea independent, but also one that required constant vigilance and political acumen. But let's not paint her as a flawless hero. Myeongseong had her share of miscalculations. Her attempts to centralize power often led to friction with regional leaders. Her efforts to push through reforms were sometimes heavy-handed, leading to resistance from those who felt their way of life was under threat. And in a society deeply rooted in tradition, change was never going to be easy. One of the more comedic elements of her reign was the introduction of Western attire into the court. Imagine the sight. Courtiers accustomed to wearing flowing handbaks now trying to navigate the intricacies of a Western suit or a corset. It was a fashion statement that was as bewildering as it was bold, and it certainly raised a few eyebrows among the traditionalists. Yet, despite the opposition, Myeongseong remained undeterred. Her vision for Korea was one of progress and modernization, and she was willing to fight for it. She understood that the world was changing, and Korea needed to change with it if it was to survive. Her story is a testament to the power of vision and determination, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As her reign continued, the tensions between her ambitious reforms and the conservative backlash only intensified. Her efforts to modernize Korea were met with increasing resistance, both from within the court and from foreign powers eager to exploit the situation. But Myeongseong was nothing if not resilient. Her ability to navigate these challenges was a testament to her political savvy and her unwavering commitment to her vision for Korea. In the grand narrative of history, Myeongseong's reign was a period of transformation and turmoil. Her efforts to drag Korea into the modern age were met with resistance at every turn, yet she remained steadfast in her vision. As we continue to explore her story, remember that history is not just a series of events, but a complex tapestry of human ambition, conflict, and change. Myeongseong's tale is one of resilience and determination, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the pursuit of progress is a noble and enduring endeavor. The stage is set for the next chapter in her story, a chapter filled with intrigue, conflict, and the relentless pursuit of a better future for Korea. Myeongseong's legacy is one of courage and tenacity, a testament to the power of vision and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be constrained by the limitations of her time. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. The stage is set for the next chapter in her story, a chapter filled with intrigue, conflict, and the relentless pursuit of a better future for Korea. Myeongseong's legacy is one of courage and tenacity, a testament to the power of vision and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be constrained by the limitations of her time. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. And just like that, we're diving headfirst into the turbulent waters of late 19th century Korea. Fasten your seatbelts, because this tale is about to take a sharp turn into the chaos of political intrigue and assassination. It's 1895, and Empress Myeongseong finds herself navigating an increasingly treacherous court, with Japan breathing down Korea's neck like a nosy neighbor who just can't take the hint. Let's set the scene. The Sino-Japanese War has just ended in 1895, with Japan triumphantly strutting away from the battlefield like a peacock on parade. The Treaty of Shimonoseki leaves Korea dangling between its erstwhile protector, China, now licking its wounds, and an emboldened Japan, eager to sink its teeth into the peninsula. Myeongseong, ever the strategist, sees the writing on the wall and realizes that Korea is in a perilous position, much like a rabbit caught between two hungry wolves. Her response? To double down on her diplomatic efforts, seeking alliances with Russia and other Western powers. Russia, with its vast empire and ambitions in Asia, seems like a promising partner. Myeongseong's courtship of Russia is strategic. She envisions a counterweight to Japan's growing influence. But here's where things start to get messy. Picture a diplomatic dance where every misstep could lead to disaster. The stakes are high, and the players are many, each with their own agenda. Myeongseong's attempts to pivot Korea's alliances are not exactly met with applause back home. The court is a boiling pot of factions, each more paranoid than the last. The pro-Japanese group, led by the likes of Myeongseong, Japan's minister to Korea, sees Myeongseong's rapprochement with Russia as a direct threat to their influence. Meanwhile, the conservatives within Korea, already wary of Myeongseong's reforms, view her international maneuvering with suspicion, as if she were inviting a fox into the henhouse. Now, let's talk about the build-up to the fateful day, October 8, 1895. In the months leading up to her assassination, the tension in the court is palpable. Imagine a pressure cooker with the heat turned up to 11. The Japanese, determined to eliminate Myeongseong as an obstacle to their plans, see an opportunity to act. Myeongseong, with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, orchestrates a plot to remove the Empress from power, permanently. On that grim October morning, a group of assassins, including Japanese agents and disgruntled Korean soldiers, stormed Gyeongbokgung Palace. Their mission: find and kill Myeongseong, sending a clear message that Japan will not tolerate any interference in its quest for dominance. In the chaos that ensues, the Empress is brutally murdered, a tragic end for a woman who had dared to challenge the status quo. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no, the aftermath of her assassination is a scandal that reverberates across the globe, creating headlines that would make today's tabloids blush. The international community is outraged, with Russia and other powers condemning Japan's actions. It's a diplomatic faux pas of epic proportions, with Japan scrambling to cover its tracks and downplay its involvement. Imagine the awkwardness of a diplomatic dinner where everyone's trying to ignore the elephant in the room, but the elephant is doing a tap dance. The media circus that follows is nothing short of sensational. Newspapers around the world jump on the story, each headline more lurid than the last. The New York Times, for instance, runs with the story, painting a picture of intrigue and betrayal that captivates readers. It's a reminder that sensationalism in the media isn't exactly a 21st century invention. It's been around as long as there have been stories to tell and audiences eager to hear them. Now, let's address some of the myths and legends that have sprung up around Myeongseong's assassination. One popular tale suggests that she was burned beyond recognition, a gruesome detail that adds a layer of horror to an already tragic event. While this story has captured the imagination of many, it's essential to sift through the drama to find the truth. Historical records suggest that her body was indeed desecrated, but the details remain murky, shrouded in the fog of political spin and propaganda. But why does Myeongseong's death matter beyond the immediate scandal? It's a pivotal moment in Korean history, a turning point that underscores the fragility of national sovereignty in the face of imperial ambitions. Her assassination is a stark reminder of the lengths to which powers will go to protect their interests, a lesson that resonates even today. In the wake of her death, King Gajang, Myeongseong's husband, flees to the Russian legation, seeking refuge from the chaos engulfing his court. It's a dramatic move, akin to a modern-day political asylum request, and it highlights the desperation of a king who has lost not just his queen, but his most trusted advisor. Gajang's flight to the legation becomes a symbol of Korea's precarious position, caught between external pressures and internal strife. The repercussions of Myeongseong's assassination reverberate for years, as Korea struggles to navigate the turbulent waters of international politics. Her death marks the beginning of a new chapter, one where Korea's independence is increasingly under threat. It's a sobering reminder that the fight for sovereignty is never straightforward, often requiring sacrifices that echo through history. As we leave this chapter of Myeongseong's life, remember that her story is far from over. The drama of her reign may have come to a tragic end, but the legacy of her vision and determination lives on. Her assassination, while a personal tragedy, is also a catalyst for change, sparking debates about Korea's future and its place in the world. The stage is set for the next act, where the consequences of her life and death will continue to unfold, shaping the destiny of a nation in ways she could never have imagined. Stay tuned, because the story of Korea's struggle for independence is just beginning, and it's one filled with twists, turns, and the relentless pursuit of a future free from domination. In the grand saga of Korea's tumultuous journey towards independence, Empress Myeongseong's story carves a path that's as complex as it is compelling. Her life and untimely death have become the stuff of legends, romanticized, mythologized, and sometimes misremembered. Now, let's peel back the layers of narrative varnish and see what's really underneath. First, let's tackle the romanticized image of Myeongseong as a tragic heroine. The allure here is palpable. A queen standing bravely against the tide of imperialism, a woman who dared to defy tradition in a patriarchal society, only to face a gruesome end. It's a narrative that resonates because it taps into universal themes of resistance, courage, and sacrifice. However, this romanticism can sometimes overshadow the more nuanced reality of her reign, which was riddled with political maneuvering, alliances formed and broken, and a pragmatic approach to survival in a rapidly changing world. Myeongseong's impact on Korean history is undeniable. Her push for modernization laid the groundwork for Korea's gradual transformation into a more open and interconnected society. In the 1890, she was advocating for reforms that would drag Korea into the modern age, including educational advancements and infrastructure improvements, at a time when many were still clinging to the past like a dog with its favorite chew toy. These reforms, though not always successful, planted seeds of change that would eventually take root. But let's not kid ourselves. Her legacy is as much about what she represented as what she achieved. She was a symbol of resistance against foreign domination, a beacon for those who saw Korea's potential beyond its borders. Her assassination by Japanese agents underscored the fragility of Korea's sovereignty and became a rallying cry for those who would continue the fight for independence. It's a legacy that has inspired countless works of art, literature, and film, each adding its own brushstroke to the portrait of a queen caught in the crosshairs of history. Now, let's pivot to the lessons her story offers for modern audiences. In today's world, where the struggle for sovereignty and self-determination continues, Myeongseong's life serves as a reminder of the enduring power of resilience and vision. Her tale is one of navigating impassable odds, of balancing tradition with the need for progress, and of standing firm in the face of overwhelming pressure. It's a story that reminds us of the importance of adaptability and the courage to challenge the status quo, even when the odds are stacked against you. Yet, it's also a cautionary tale about the cost of political ambition and the dangers of isolationism. Myeongseong's efforts to modernize and strengthen Korea were met with fierce opposition, both from within and outside her borders. Her assassination, a brutal reminder of the geopolitical game at play, underscores the harsh reality that sometimes even the most noble intentions can lead to unintended and tragic consequences. It's a lesson that resonates today as nations grapple with the complexities of global politics and the challenges of maintaining autonomy in an interconnected world. In scholarly circles, Myeongseong's legacy is a subject of ongoing debate. Historians continue to dissect her policies, her alliances, and her vision for Korea, each adding their own interpretation to the tapestry of her life. Some view her as a reformer ahead of her time, while others see her as a figure caught in the inevitable tide of history. What is clear, however, is that her influence on Korea's trajectory cannot be overstated. Her story is a vital chapter in the nation's history, one that continues to inform and inspire discussions about Korea's place in the world. In popular culture, Myeongseong's story remains a captivating tale of intrigue and drama. From television dramas to feature films, her life has been dramatized and reimagined, often with a flair for the dramatic that would make even the most seasoned screenwriter green with envy. These portrayals, while sometimes straying from historical accuracy, capture the essence of a woman who stood defiantly against the forces that sought to control her fate. For audiences, her story is one of empowerment, a narrative that highlights the strength and determination of a queen who refused to be silenced. As we draw the curtain on Empress Myeongseong's story, it's worth reflecting on the broader significance of her life and legacy. She was a woman who dared to dream of a career that was not just a pawn on the geopolitical chessboard, but a player in its own right. Her efforts to modernize, her diplomatic acumen, and her unyielding spirit serve as a testament to what can be achieved when one refuses to accept the limitations imposed by circumstance. And so, as we bid farewell to the Empress, let's remember her not just as a tragic figure, but as a symbol of resilience and vision, a reminder that the pursuit of progress is a journey fraught with challenges, but one that is ultimately worth undertaking. Her legacy is a tapestry of courage, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of a future free from subjugation, a story that continues to inspire and resonate, even in the modern age. In the end, Myeongseong's story is not just about the past. It's a call to action for the present and a beacon of hope for the future. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe was as lively as a tavern on a Saturday night, if that tavern was filled with an uninvited guest named the Black Death. This was not your average medieval crisis. It was the mother of all pandemics. The kind where you don't just wash your hands a little more often, you might consider relocating to Mars if that were an option. The Black Death, a grim nickname for the bubonic plague, had the audacity to crash Europe's party and leave a staggering 25 million people dead in its wake. That's about a third of the continent's population at the time. Talk about a guest that overstays its welcome. The plague didn't just pop up like a surprise pimple. It spread like wildfire, fueled by a combination of factors that could make any modern epidemiologist break out in hives. Let's start with the usual suspect, hygiene, or rather, the medieval version of hygiene, which was more of a vague aspiration than a daily routine. Bathing was considered suspiciously decadent, so most folks figured they'd skip it. After all, why bother when you could cover up with layers of foul-smelling clothes and call it a day? This dubious approach to cleanliness created a breeding ground for fleas and rats, the real VIPs in this pestilent drama. The plague first made its European debut in 1347, hitching a ride with traders along the Silk Road, proof that globalization is not just a 21st century phenomenon. By the time it reached the bustling ports of Italy, it spread faster than gossip in a small town. In cities like Florence, where the population density rivaled a can of sardines, the disease had a field day. Within months, it had made its way to London, Paris, and beyond, leaving trails of empty villages and barren fields in its wake. If you'd been living back then, you'd have found it harder to avoid the plague than to dodge a tax collector. The reactions to this terrifying new reality were as varied as the remedies concocted to deal with it. On one end of the spectrum, you had the staunchly pious who believed the plague was a divine punishment. Cue the religious processions, complete with self-flagellation, because nothing says repentance like whipping yourself in public. On the other end, you had those who figured if the end was nigh, they might as well throw the medieval equivalent of a rager. And who could blame them? When faced with the possibility of imminent death, It's a toss-up between sharpening your prayer skills or investing in a good ale and a questionable sense of humor. Superstition, of course, ran rampant. People couldn't Google, "How does the plague spread?" So they turned to more creative sources of wisdom. Cats and dogs, innocent bystanders in this whole mess, were often blamed and killed, which ironically only worsened the rodent problem. Some townsfolk believed in the healing power of sound. Bells were rung, cannons fired, and even the loudest shouting was encouraged to scare away the disease. If nothing else, it probably gave everyone a temporary hearing challenge to distract from the chaos. Primary sources from the time, like the writings of Giovanni Boccaccio in the Decameron, paint a vivid picture of life during the plague. Boccaccio describes how people would abandon their family members at the first sign of illness, a stark reminder of the fear that gripped even the most tight-knit communities. Brother abandoned brother, he wrote, and oftentimes husband-wife. Nay, what is more, parents refused to visit or tend their very children as though they had not been theirs. These weren't just tales of woe. They were reality checks on how fragile human bonds could become when survival instincts kicked in. But let's not romanticize the past with notions of a simpler, community-focused life. The harsh truth is that medieval society was as complex and divided as any modern one. The pandemic exposed these fractures, highlighting the stark differences between the haves and have-nots. The wealthy could often retreat to their country estates, while the urban poor were left to face the worst of the outbreak in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. It was a grim reminder that in times of crisis, not everyone suffers equally. And yet, amidst the fear and superstition, faith remained a powerful force. For many, religion offered a glimmer of hope and a sense of order in a world spiraling into chaos. Churches became both sanctuaries and graveyards, as desperate masses flocked to them seeking solace or a miracle cure. Clergy members who tended to the sick often paid the ultimate price, becoming some of the unsung heroes of this dark chapter in history. So, there you have it. Europe in the 14th century, knee-deep in a plague that was as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast. The Black Death may have been a catastrophic event, but it also set the stage for profound changes in society. It was a time when fear and faith walked hand in hand, where survival meant navigating a world where death was as close as your next-door neighbor. As we delve deeper into this period, remember that while history may not repeat itself, it certainly has a twisted sense of humor. As the Black Death swept through Europe like a medieval hurricane, leaving chaos in its wake, it didn't just devastate populations. It turned the economy on its head. Picture this, a world where laborers suddenly became the medieval equivalent of rock stars. With about a third of the workforce wiped out faster than you can say, plague doctor, the surviving workers found themselves in high demand. Employers, desperate to get their fields plowed and their goods produced, had to pony up more cash to keep their businesses afloat. Suddenly, being a peasant wasn't quite the raw deal it had been for centuries. Talk about a plot twist worthy of any TV drama. Let's dive into some numbers to really grasp the economic upheaval. Before the plague, the average daily wage for a laborer might have been around 2 to 3 pence. But as the Grim Reaper took his toll, wages skyrocketed, sometimes doubling or even tripling. It was like medieval inflation on steroids, making today's price hikes look like child's play. And it wasn't just wages that went through the roof. The cost of grain, a staple in everyone's diet, soared as well. Imagine paying the medieval equivalent of a month's rent for a simple loaf of bread. Suddenly, that avocado toast you're splurging on doesn't seem so outrageous, does it? This economic shake-up had everyone scrambling. Landowners, used to having their pick of cheap labor, were now practically begging peasants to come work for them. In some areas, attempts were made to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Enter the Statute of Labourers in 1351, a desperate move by the English Parliament to curb rising wages and stabilise prices. But guess what? Trying to legislate against basic economic principles is like trying to stop a tidal wave with a sandcastle. It didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. The plague-induced labour shortage also had some unintended social consequences. With fewer serfs to till the land, many lords were forced to lease their lands to free tenants. This shift gradually eroded the feudal system, giving peasants more freedom and mobility. For the first time, many realized they could pack up and move to greener pastures, literally. The rigid social hierarchy that had kept everyone in their predetermined place for centuries was beginning to crumble like a stale loaf of bread. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about these changes. The upper classes, accustomed to a life of luxury built on the backs of cheap labor, were now facing their own brand of medieval anxiety. Suddenly, the gap between the haves and have-nots was narrowing, and not in a way that the elite found comforting. The old order was being challenged, and like any group facing an existential threat, the privileged were not about to go down without a fight. The chaos didn't just stop at the fields and the markets, though. It also seeped into the very fabric of everyday life. With money losing its value faster than a medieval horse can gallop, and goods becoming scarcer, barter systems began to pop up everywhere. It wasn't uncommon to see a sheep traded for a bushel of grain or a barrel of ale. The silver penny might have been the official currency, but in reality it was the woolen tunic or the well-fed pig that held more sway in the marketplace. As the plague years dragged on, the economic landscape transformed in ways that no one could have anticipated. The old rules no longer applied, and people at all levels of society had to adapt or perish. It was a time of great upheaval and opportunity, where fortunes could be made or lost in the blink of an eye. For some, it was a chance to rise above their station. For others, a bitter reminder that nothing was permanent, not even the plague itself. But let's not get too romantic about this economic revolution. For every peasant who managed to secure a better life, there were countless others who remained trapped in poverty, their lives dictated by forces beyond their control. The wheels of change turned slowly, and while the Black Death may have hastened their movement, it was still a long road to a more equitable society. In the end, the economic aftermath of the Black Death was as unpredictable as the disease itself. It reshaped medieval Europe in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few decades earlier. So while the plague was a catastrophe of epic proportions, it was also a catalyst for change, forcing people to rethink their place in the world and their relationship with one another. And if history teaches us anything, it's that even the darkest times can spark a flicker of hope, however dim it might seem amidst the chaos. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of this tumultuous period, remember that the story of the Black Death is more than just numbers and statistics. It's a tale of human resilience, adaptability, and the eternal struggle to find meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to our suffering. So buckle up, because the ride is far from over, and the twists and turns of history are just getting started. So, as the Black Death continued its grim tour of Europe, it wasn't just the economy that was doing the medieval cha-cha. Faith and fear were having their own twisted tango. Picture this. You've got a world where the church is both the ultimate authority and the town therapist, promising salvation, but also a good dose of guilt on the side. During the plague years, the church's message was clear. This was no ordinary illness. It was divine retribution. And boy, did they know how to spin that narrative like a medieval PR agency on steroids. Let's talk about those flagellant processions. Ah, the flagellants. Those cheery folks who believed that a bit of public self-harm was just what the doctor ordered to ward off the plague. These processions were like the rock concerts of their day, complete with chanting, singing, and a healthy dose of communal whipping. Groups of penitent souls, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, roamed from town to town, whipping themselves into a frenzy. Literally, they'd march into a village, whip themselves silly, and hope that their extreme devotion would convince God to call off the plague. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. But hey, at least they put on a good show. The appeal of these practices wasn't just in their theatricality. They offered a sense of agency in a world where people felt utterly powerless. When you're staring down a disease that could snatch you up faster than you can say, "Hail Mary," a bit of ritualized pain might seem like a small price to pay. Plus, it was a communal experience. Nothing bonds a group quite like synchronized suffering. Now, let's not forget the church's role in this divine drama. The clergy, those steadfast shepherds of souls, were quick to point fingers at sin as the root cause of the plague. And who could blame them? Little fear goes a long way in filling those collection plates. It was a classic good news, bad news situation. The bad news was that your sinful ways brought down God's wrath. The good news, you could buy your way back into his good graces with a generous donation. We'll call it the original medieval crowdfunding campaign. Donate today, save your soul tomorrow. Of course, not everyone was buying what the church was selling. Some folks saw these spiritual leaders as opportunists, using the plague as a convenient excuse to line their pockets. And honestly, who could blame them for being a bit skeptical? After all, for every priest who genuinely tended to the sick and dying, there was another who seemed more interested in the latest ecclesiastical real estate. But let's not paint with too broad a brush. Many clergy members were truly heroic, tending to the sick at great personal risk. They were the frontline workers of their day, and their mortality rates reflected that grim reality. It's estimated that in some areas, as many as 40% of the clergy succumbed to the plague, which, if nothing else, was a testament to their dedication, or perhaps their lack of a good PPE. Yet, even as the church preached about divine punishment, it couldn't ignore the practicalities of plague management. Fun fact: some religious institutions became early adopters of quarantine measures, albeit with a spiritual twist. Monasteries, for example, would sometimes isolate themselves from the outside world, which was both a practical move and a handy way to avoid the less-than-savory elements of society. Whether they were motivated by piety or practicality, these early quarantines were a precursor to the more secular public health measures that would emerge in the following centuries. And then there's the curious case of relics. In a time when science was more about alchemy than antibiotics, people turned to holy relics for protection. If a saint's knuckle bone could stop a plague, folks were all in. Churches, ever resourceful, capitalized on this demand by showcasing their relic collections like medieval QVC, claiming miracle cures and divine protection for those who believed and contributed. The social dynamics during the plague were a wild mix of fear, faith, and financial transactions, basically a medieval soap opera with higher stakes. The church, while offering spiritual guidance, was also deeply entwined with the economic and political fabric of the time. As people grappled with the terror of the plague, their faith was both a comfort and a source of profound anxiety, a reminder that divine judgment was always just a sin away. So, while the Black Death laid waste to populations, it also sparked a crisis of faith, leaving people questioning the power and intentions of their spiritual leaders. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, it's clear that the plague was not just a health crisis, but a catalyst for broader societal shifts. Yet, the story doesn't end here. As we continue to explore this period, remember that the interplay of faith, fear, and survival was as complex as it was compelling, and we've only just scratched the surface. As the Black Death carved its grim path through Europe, it left society grasping for any semblance of normalcy, even during cherished occasions like Christmas. While today we picture medieval Christmas as a jolly feast straight out of a storybook, complete with merry carolers and bountiful feasts, the reality during plague years was as bleak as a midwinter night. Let's cut through the candlelit veneer and get to the nitty-gritty. For starters, celebrating Christmas when death was practically a houseguest posed its own set of challenges. Imagine trying to summon holiday cheer when the Grim Reaper could be lurking around the corner like an unwanted in-law. But the human spirit is nothing if not resilient, and some traditions stubbornly endured, much like that fruitcake that keeps reappearing every December. First, let's debunk the myth of the medieval Christmas feast. Sure, there were some grand celebrations in the halls of the wealthy, but for the average peasant, Christmas dinner was more survivalist than sumptuous. With the plague having decimated herds and fields, meat was a luxury rather than a staple. Instead of a roast boar, you might find a meager portion of salted fish on your plate if you were lucky. And forget about imported spices. Pepper and cinnamon were as rare as a sober night. The simplest dish could cost a small fortune, with a pound of pepper setting you back a whopping 15 shillings, more than most families earned in a month. But Christmas was more than food. It was a time for community and church services, albeit ones tinged with apprehension. Churches, which once echoed with the jubilant sounds of midnight mass, now hosted summer gatherings. Attendance was often sparse due to fear of contagion, leaving pews as empty as a monastic vow. Yet, the church remained a focal point, offering a flicker of stability amidst the chaos. Priests would deliver sermons that were part fire and brimstone, part motivational speech, reminding congregants that faith was their best defense against despair. Yet, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some traditions, like the Yule log, persisted through the darkest times, offering both warmth and symbolic hope. The burning of the Yule log was a way to cast aside the darkness and usher in the light, quite literally. Families would gather to watch the log burn, each spark representing a wish for prosperity and health in the coming year. It was a small act of defiance against the encroaching shadows, a reminder that even the longest night can be brightened by a single flame. And what about gift-giving? While today's Christmas is synonymous with a consumerist frenzy, back then, gifts were more modest. Think homemade trinkets or tokens exchanged among loved ones. In an era where basic survival was a daily challenge, the greatest gift was often simply being with family and friends, assuming they hadn't been swept away by the plague. The act of giving was less about material wealth and more about strengthening social bonds in a time when community was a lifeline. Interestingly, some of the most enduring traditions owe their longevity to the very climate of fear and uncertainty the plague fostered. Carols, for instance, became a way to lift spirits and spread messages of hope. Far from the polished performances we know today, these carols were the medieval equivalent of viral TikTok trends, catchy, communal, and apt to evolve as they traveled from village to village. They were sung in taverns, around hearths, and even in those sparse church gatherings, creating a shared experience that transcended social divisions. Primary sources from the era offer a candid glimpse into these subdued festivities. Take the writings of chronicler Jean de Venette, who observed how Christmas in plague years was marked by a palpable tension. His accounts reveal that, while some chose to celebrate with a kind of desperate abandon, others retreated into quiet reflection, wary of what the new year might bring. It was a delicate dance between tradition and the harsh reality of a world turned upside down. So why did some traditions endure while others faded into oblivion? The answer lies in their ability to adapt. Those customs that could be practiced with little cost or risk, like singing carols, burning the Yule log, or attending a scaled-down mass, had the best chances of survival. They didn't require extravagant resources or large gatherings, making them perfect for a time when both were in short supply. Moreover, these traditions provided a sense of continuity, anchoring people in a past they understood even as the future loomed uncertain. In a sense, they were the medieval version of comfort food, nourishing the soul when the body was under siege. The persistence of these customs speaks to an innate human desire to find meaning and connection, even, or especially, in times of crisis. So, while the Black Death may have cast a long shadow over Christmas during the plague years, it also highlighted the resilience of human traditions. Stripped of their romantic trappings, medieval celebrations were less about lavish feasts and more about finding light in the darkness. They remind us that even when the world seems to be falling apart, the simple act of coming together can offer solace and strength. As we venture further into this historical tapestry, remember that the story of the Black Death is as much about survival as it is about suffering, an enduring testament to the human spirit's capacity for hope amidst despair. As the Black Death cast its long shadow over medieval Europe, it wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. The plague was like a medieval wrecking ball, smashing through the established order and leaving behind a landscape ripe for change. As the dust settled, the societal shifts were as profound as they were unexpected. Let's start with the crumbling feudal system, which was as rigid as an old knight's joints. The plague-induced labor shortage meant that peasants and serfs suddenly found themselves in the driver's seat for once. Gone were the days when they were tethered to the land like medieval furniture. With landowners desperate for workers, serfs could now negotiate better terms or even bolt for better opportunities elsewhere. It was like a medieval job market boom, and peasants were cashing in their chips. This newfound mobility wasn't just a career boost, it was the beginning of the end for the feudal system. Landowners, accustomed to ruling over their fiefdoms with iron fists, now had to adapt or watch their lands go fallow. Some turned to leasing land to free tenants, effectively loosening their grip on the social hierarchy. Others tried to cling to the past with laws like the Statute of Laborers in 1351, which tried to freeze wages and keep peasants in their place. But enforcing such laws was like herding medieval cats, impossible and often counterproductive. And let's talk about those laws for a moment. Their failure was a testament to the shifting power dynamics. The ruling classes realized that you can't legislate away economic realities. Peasants were no longer content with crumbs from the Lord's table. They wanted a seat at the feast. This shift in power dynamics planted the seeds for future revolts, such as the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England. It was a reminder that when you push people too far, they tend to push back, sometimes with pitchforks. Moving on to the urban landscape, medieval cities were like pressure cookers of change. With a significant chunk of the population gone, the survivors found themselves in a world that was theirs for the taking. Skilled laborers and artisans were in high demand, and those who survived could command higher wages and better working conditions. The guilds, which had been the gatekeepers of trade and craftsmanship, saw their influence wane as new opportunities arose for independent entrepreneurs. It was the dawn of a more market-driven economy, where merit and skill began to overshadow birth and title. In the realm of faith, the plague years were a double-edged sword. On one hand, the Church's claim as the moral and spiritual authority was severely tested. The failure to provide answers or divine intervention left many questioning the Church's power. On the other hand, the Church's infrastructure, already vast and influential, adapted by becoming more involved in community welfare. Monasteries and abbeys, which had previously been spiritual retreats, now played crucial roles in local economies and healthcare. They were like the medieval version of NGOs, providing aid and solace in a world gone mad. The cultural impacts of the Black Death were equally significant. The art and literature of the time took a macabre turn, reflecting the grim realities of life and death. The dance macabre, or dance of death, became a popular motif, illustrating the universality of death. No matter your station, the skeletal figure of death was always lurking. This morbid fascination was both a coping mechanism and a profound reflection on the human condition. It was as if society collectively realized that if you can't laugh at death, you might as well dance with it. In literature, works like Boccaccio's The Decameron captured the zeitgeist of the era, weaving tales of love, humor, and tragedy amidst the backdrop of the plague. These stories were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people sought connection and meaning. The written word became a refuge, a way to process the chaos and find solace in shared stories. And let's not forget the impact on health and medicine. The plague was a wake-up call for medieval Europe, highlighting the dire need for better hygiene and medical practices. While it would take centuries for modern medicine to emerge, the seeds were planted during this period. The concept of quarantine, for example, became more widespread, with the Venetian government instituting a 40-day isolation period for ships. Hence the term quarantine, derived from quaranta giorni, or 40 days. The Black Death also spurred a greater interest in scientific inquiry, as people sought to understand and combat the disease. While alchemy and astrology still held sway, the foundations for more empirical approaches were being laid. It was a slow and often painful journey, but the quest for knowledge was unstoppable, driven by the inherent human desire to survive and thrive. In the end, the legacy of the Black Death was as complex as it was transformative. It wasn't just a story of death and despair. It was a catalyst for change, pushing Europe toward a more modern age. The shifts in power dynamics, the evolution of cultural norms, and the questioning of established authorities set the stage for the Renaissance and beyond. The plague may have been a grim chapter in history, but it was also a turning point, a stark reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, the human spirit is remarkably resilient. So, as we wrap up this journey through the plague years, let's leave with this thought. History is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experiences. The Black Death was a time when fear, faith, and festivity collided, creating a world that was forever changed. It taught us that while we may not always control our circumstances, we can choose how we respond to them. And in that choice lies the true power of the human spirit, a power that endures even in the face of death and despair. In the grand tapestry of history, the origins of ancient Korean kingdoms are like that one peculiar thread in your favorite sweater. It's essential, yet often overlooked. Let's unravel this mystery, starting with a kingdom that might sound like it belongs in a fantasy novel, Gojosian. Established around 2333 BCE, Gojosian is often credited as Korea's first kingdom. And if you're wondering how we even got this date, well, you can thank a mixture of ancient texts and a lot of imaginative storytelling. Enter Dangun, a figure who's part historical legend, part ancient PR campaign. According to the myth, Dangun was born from Huang, a heavenly prince and a bear-turned woman. Yes, you heard that right, a bear. In today's terms, think of this as the earliest form of creative branding designed to give Gajosian some divine street cred. After all, nothing says, respect my authority, quite like being the offspring of a celestial being and a transformed bear. But let's hit the brakes on this mythical train and shift gears to the reality tracks. The legend of Dangun served a political purpose. It wasn't just about creating a cool origin story. It was a way to legitimize power and unify the people under a shared narrative. Imagine trying to run a kingdom where every other person has their own version of how it all started. Instead, by promoting a single, captivating story, Gajosian's rulers could rally their citizens around a common identity. But like all good PR, the story sidestepped some gritty realities. The socio-economic structure of early Korean society was less about heavenly interventions and more about good old human ingenuity and survival instincts. Gajosian was a patchwork of tribal communities, each with its own leader. These tribes were primarily agrarian, relying heavily on agriculture to sustain their economy. Rice was the name of the game, and those who controlled the land were the big players. Think of it as the original power lunch, except the menu was strictly rice-based. The social order was as straightforward as a line at a medieval market. You had the chieftains at the top, the warriors and skilled craftspeople in the middle, and the farmers and laborers at the bottom. And while it might sound cut and dry, the reality was a bit more fluid. Alliances shifted as quickly as the seasons, and power dynamics were as stable as a three-legged chair. We can't forget the influence of neighboring regions. Gajosian wasn't some isolated bubble. It was part of the broader East Asian geopolitical landscape. Trade routes connected them with the Chinese dynasties, and these interactions were instrumental in shaping the kingdom's development. Cultural exchanges brought new technologies and ideas, while military skirmishes kept everyone on their toes. It's like living next door to a hyper-competitive neighbor who's constantly upgrading their house. You're bound to pick up a few tricks. But let's not romanticize this too much. The early days of Korean kingdoms were more survivalist documentary than epic saga. Resources were scarce, and communities had to innovate to thrive. Bronze technology, for instance, was a game-changer, allowing for better tools and weapons, which in turn led to more efficient farming and successful defense strategies. The people of Gajosian were nothing if not resourceful, adapting to their environment with a tenacity that would make even the hardiest reality TV survivalist proud. This brings us back to the myths. While the stories of Dangun and divine bears make for great fireside tales, they also serve as a reminder of how history is often a blend of fact and fiction, shaped by those who hold the power to tell it. In understanding the early Korean kingdoms, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth to uncover the real socio-economic structures that underpinned their rise. It's a story of grit, innovation, and a touch of celestial flair. Because, let's face it, who doesn't love a good bear-to-human transformation story? As we leap from the mythical to the historical, let's dive headfirst into the Three Kingdoms period, a time when Korea was like a reality show with three main contestants, Goguryeo, Beach, and Silla. Each had its eye on the prize, domination over the Korean peninsula, and they weren't shy about using every trick in the book, from epic battles to political backstabbing. Think of it as Game of Thrones without dragons, but with just as much drama and intrigue. First up, let's chat about Goguryeo, the northern powerhouse known for its military prowess and formidable warriors. If you think about it, Goguryeo was like that kid in school who was always ready for a fight, but also had the smarts to back it up. These guys weren't just swinging swords, they were strategizing, building fortresses, and expanding their territory like they were collecting stamps. Their secret weapon, a knack for forming strategic alliances, especially with the Chinese dynasties, which was no small feat given the complex geopolitical chessboard of the time. But let's not get too swept up in the military grandeur. Behind the scenes, life in Goguryeo was less about glory and more about grinding. Conscription was a way of life, and every able-bodied man was expected to serve. It sounds noble, until you realize that these soldiers were often fighting neighbors and friends, because in the Three Kingdoms period, alliances were about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. On top of that, the taxes were as heavy as a Goguryeo war helmet. The kingdom needed funds to maintain its military machine, and that burden fell squarely on the shoulders of its citizens. So while the rulers were busy plotting their next conquest, the average Joe was probably more concerned about how to keep his rice bowl filled. Heading south, we find Beach, the kingdom that was like the charismatic underdog with a flair for diplomacy. Beach was no slouch in the military department either, but where they really shone was in the art of making friends. They had trade routes that stretched far and wide, and they weren't afraid to use them to bolster their economy and influence. Cultural exchange was their forte, and they had a knack for absorbing and spreading ideas, particularly those of Buddhism, which they helped introduce to Japan. Beach's rulers were like the ultimate networkers, always keeping an eye out for potential allies and opportunities. However, Beach's charm came with a price. Their focus on diplomacy and trade meant they were often caught in the crossfire of larger powers. It's like being the popular kid in school who suddenly finds themselves in the middle of a food fight. They were vulnerable to both external threats and internal strife. And while their leaders were busy sending envoys and forging alliances, the everyday folks were often left to deal with the harsh realities of taxation and resource scarcity. The kingdom might have been building bridges, but its citizens were the ones footing the bill. Finally, we arrive at Silla, kingdom that played the long game and won. Silla was the dark horse of the trio, initially the smallest and least powerful. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in strategic acumen. Silla's strength lay in its ability to build internal stability through a strict social hierarchy supported by Confucian ideals. It was all about knowing your place, and this clear structure helped them maintain order and efficiency. In a world of shifting alliances and constant warfare, Silla's leaders knew that a stable home front was the key to long-term success. Silla's rulers were like chess masters, thinking several moves ahead. They forged crucial alliances with the Tang dynasty in China, which proved decisive in their quest to unify the Korean peninsula. But let's not get too starry-eyed about their success. The road to unification was paved with blood, sweat, and a lot of taxes. Silla's conscription policies were as rigorous as a boot camp, and their citizens bore the brunt of the kingdom's ambitions with heavy levies to fund their military campaigns. In the quest for dominance, each kingdom had its own flavor of social hierarchy, a mix of Confucian ideals and good old-fashioned power grabs. At the top were the rulers and aristocrats, living it up in their palaces and enjoying the finer things. Below them were the officials and military leaders, each vying for favor and influence. It was a world where the right connections could elevate you faster than a catapult, but a misstep could send you plummeting to the bottom rung. For the common folk, life was a balancing act between duty and survival. They were the backbone of the kingdom, working the fields and paying taxes to support the upper echelons. It was a system that promised stability, but often delivered hardship. Yet, despite the grind and the grit, there was a sense of resilience among the people, a determination to thrive no matter the odds. So, while the Three Kingdoms period might sound like a saga of epic battles and heroic deeds, the reality was a bit more nuanced. It was a time of strategic maneuvers, political machinations, and relentless ambition. And through it all, the citizens of Goguryeo, Beach, and Silla lived their lives, navigating the complexities of their world with the kind of grit and tenacity that history often glosses over. As we look back at this era, it's important to remember that behind every grand narrative are the countless untold stories of those who lived it. The Three Kingdoms period wasn't just about the rise and fall of kingdoms. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of the people who called them home. And while we might be tempted to focus on the kings and generals, the real story lies in the everyday lives of the people who built, sustained, and ultimately defined these ancient Korean kingdoms. Now, speaking of grand sagas, let's dive into the Silla unification in 668 CE. It's often portrayed as Korea's epic gathering of the clans moment, a romantic tale of unity, peace, and progress. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was more Game of Thrones than Kumbaya. First off, Silla didn't just roll up with flowers and goodwill. This was a calculated power play, folks. The unification was less about holding hands and more about strategic chess moves on a blood-soaked board. Silla leveraged its alliance with the Tang dynasty of China to outmaneuver its rivals, Goguryeo and Beach. Imagine Scylla as the scrappy underdog who knew how to pick the right friends at the right time. Definitely not a naive Cinderella story. Let's talk betrayal, because what's a good historical drama without it? Scylla's alliance with Tang was a double-edged sword. Sure, the Tang troops were instrumental in defeating Goguryeo and Beech, but once the dust settled, the Tang had their own plans for the peninsula. They intended to annex the territories and create a Tang protectorate, but Scylla had other ideas. In a move worthy of a plot twist in a political thriller, Scylla turned against their former allies, driving the Tang forces out and claiming the territories for themselves. It was a classic case of, thanks for your help, now don't let the door hit you on the way out. The unification didn't just spring from the political and military arenas, it was deeply rooted in economic necessity. The costs of war are never cheap, and while Scylla's rulers were busy plotting territorial expansions, the peasantry bore the financial brunt. Taxes were ramped up to fund these military excursions, squeezing the life out of the common folk like a lemon at a summer lemonade stand. And if you think tax evasion is a modern art, think again. Back then, it was a survival tactic. Now, let's throw Buddhism into the mix. This wasn't just a spiritual movement, it was the ultimate social glue. The ruling elites used Buddhism as a tool to promote social cohesion, but not without some ulterior motives. By supporting Buddhism, the elites could consolidate power, with monasteries becoming centers of influence and wealth. Picture it. Monks were like the original influencers, spreading messages of peace and unity while subtly reinforcing the social hierarchy. Buddhism promised karmic rewards for the downtrodden, which, quite conveniently, encouraged them to accept their lot in life. Talk about a celestial carrot stick approach, but let's not completely dismiss the genuine appeal of Buddhism. For many, it offered a refuge and a sense of hope amid the chaos. Temples became places of learning and community where the weary could find solace. The emphasis on compassion and moral conduct resonated with the people who were, quite frankly, tired of all the backstabbing and drama. Still, while the commoners found spiritual reprieve, the elite's embrace of Buddhism often translated into lavish temple sponsorships, a sneaky way to flaunt wealth and piety simultaneously. As the Silla kingdom expanded, so did its internal struggles. Power struggles within the royal court were as common as rice in a Korean meal. Rival factions vied for influence, and allegiance shifts were about as predictable as weather forecasts. It was like a soap opera with a revolving cast of characters, each plotting their own ascent to power. The throne was more of a revolving door than a seat of stability. Amid this political turbulence, the economic burden continued to weigh heavily on the shoulders of the peasantry. With land taxes and corvée labor, think of it as mandatory, unpaid public service, being the order of the day, the average farmer was left with little more than the clothes on their back and the dirt under their fingernails. And while the aristocrats were busy enjoying the spoils of war, the peasants were busy trying to figure out how to make ends meet. It's a tale as old as time. The few reap the rewards while the many do the hard labor. So, while the Silla unification is often depicted as a glorious chapter in Korean history, it's essential to peel back the shiny veneer and see the complex, gritty layers underneath. It was a period of calculated moves, strategic alliances, and, yes, a hefty dose of betrayal. The unification didn't happen because of a collective epiphany about national identity. It was about power, survival, and the relentless pursuit of dominance. As we examine this era, we can't ignore the enduring resilience of the Korean people. They navigated these turbulent times with remarkable tenacity, adapting and surviving despite the odds. The Silla unification wasn't just a political achievement. It was a testament to the unyielding spirit of a people who, despite the chaos and hardship, managed to carve out a place in history. And as we leave this chapter open for further exploration, let's ponder this. In the grand narrative of history, what's more compelling? The stories of kings and battles, or the untold tales of those who lived in their shadows? As we continue our journey through the annals of ancient Korea, remember that behind every grand event lies a multitude of human stories waiting to be uncovered. As we ponder those untold tales, let's dive into the Goryeo dynasty, a period that's like a historical buffet, overflowing with intrigue, power plays, and cultural sagas. The dynasty kicked off in 918 under the leadership of Huang, a man with ambition as vast as the Korean peninsula. Born in the coastal town of Songdo, present-day Myeongseong, Huang was the charismatic leader who managed to unify the later three kingdoms. Picture him as the maestro of a chaotic orchestra, turning discord into a harmonious symphony. His recipe for success: a mix of political savvy and strategic marriage alliances that would make even the most seasoned matchmaker blush. But don't let the romanticized image of unity fool you. Huang Jun's rise to power was more chess match than fairy tale. His conquests weren't just about expanding territory. They were about consolidating power, knitting together a patchwork of feuding states into a single, unified fabric. Now, Huang Jun might have had the vision, but it was the civil service exam that became the ultimate game-changer. Introduced in 958, this exam was touted as a meritocratic marvel, a system where talent could rise to the top like cream in a milk jug. Or so the story goes. In reality, it was less about rewarding merit and more about maintaining the status quo. Sure, the exam was open to all, but let's not kid ourselves. In a society where wealth and connections were everything, your chances without them were about as slim as a threadbare blanket in a harsh winter. The exam focused on Confucian classics, making it clear that the dynasty valued scholarly prowess above all else. But here's the kicker. Even if you aced the exam, if you didn't have the right last name or the right family connections, your career prospects were about as promising as a snowball in the Sahara. The exam system was more of a political tool, a way for the elite to keep the power lines clear and the riffraff at bay. It's like being told anyone can be president, but only if your family has a long tradition of presidents. And just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated, enter the Mongols, those inveterate party crashers of the medieval world. The Mongol invasions in the 13th century were like a historical plot twist nobody saw coming, turning Goryeo political landscape into a turbulent tempest. The first wave hit in 1231, and by 1259, the Goryeo rulers had surrendered, leading to an uneasy peace that was as stable as a house of cards. For over 80 years, the Goryeo kings were caught in a Mongol chokehold, forced to pay tribute and intermarry with Mongol royalty, a matrimonial strategy that was less about love and more about survival. Despite this tumult, the Goryeo period wasn't all doom and gloom. In fact, it was a cultural renaissance that defied the chaos. The era saw the creation of masterpieces like the Tripitaka Korina, a stunning collection of Buddhist scriptures carved onto over 80,000 wooden blocks. Crafted between 1237 and 1248, this monumental project was Goryeo's way of saying, sure, the Mongols might be knocking at our door, but check out our cultural bling. Talk about resilience through art. Goryeo's celadon pottery, with its exquisite green glaze, became the envy of ceramicists across Asia. Picture this: artists crafting intricate designs that seemed to capture the very essence of nature, even as their world was in upheaval. It was a reminder that beauty could bloom in adversity, that creativity was a refuge from the storms of history. Yet, for the common folk, life during this so-called Renaissance was more grindstone than glory. The peasantry bore the brunt of Mongol demands, with taxes and forced labor squeezing them tighter than a constrictor's hug. And while the elites engaged in cultural patronage, ordinary citizens were busy figuring out how to survive the latest invasion or tax increase. It was a classic tale of disparity, where the upper crust enjoyed the fruits of culture, the lower strata labored to make ends meet. The Goryeo dynasty, then, was a study in contrasts. It was a time when scholarly learning and artistic achievement flourished, even as political maneuvering and social inequality persisted. It's easy to romanticize the period as a golden age of culture, but beneath the surface lay a complex web of power dynamics and human struggle. As we continue to unravel the layers of Goryeo's history, let's remember that behind every grand cultural achievement were the countless hands that labored, the minds that toiled, and the spirits that refused to be broken. The dynasty's story is one of resilience, a testament to the enduring human capacity to create, innovate, and inspire, even when the odds are stacked sky-high against them. So, what does this say about the human condition? Perhaps it's a reminder that history is never as black and white as it seems, that beneath the grand narratives lie countless shades of grey. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the intricacies of the Goryeo dynasty, let's keep our eyes peeled for those moments where myth and reality collide, where the tales of kings and warriors intersect with the lives of the people who truly defined an era. Stay tuned as we continue to explore this fascinating tapestry, one thread at a time. As we move from the Goryeo dynasty into the Joseon era, think of it as swapping out your medieval armor for some Confucian robes. The Joseon dynasty, reigning from 1392 to 1897, was like that strict teacher who insists on rules and order, but occasionally surprises you with a cool science experiment. At its core, Joseon was all about Confucianism, and they took it very seriously, like, we're going to restructure society from top to bottom, seriously. Founded by Myeongseong, who later became King Tudor, the Joseon dynasty had a thing for Confucian principles like a teenager obsessed with the latest TikTok trend. King Tudor was no slouch when it came to political maneuvering. He managed to overthrow the Goryeo dynasty with a mix of military muscle and savvy alliances, kind of like dethroning a social media star with a well-timed viral video. But let's not sugarcoat this. The transition wasn't just a peaceful handover. It was a power play, pure and simple, with more backstabbing than a soap opera season finale. Now, let's talk about the so-called benevolent kings of Joseon, those paragons of virtue we read about in the history books. Sure, they made some impressive strides in governance and culture, but let's not forget that their benevolence often came with strings attached, like a free trial with hidden fees. Take King Sejong the Great, for instance. He's hailed as a cultural icon for creating Hangul, the Korean script that made literacy more accessible. And while that's truly commendable, it wasn't entirely altruistic. By promoting literacy, Sejong strengthened central control, ensuring that the Joseon dynasty could keep tabs on its citizens more effectively than a 21st-century smartphone app. The real kicker here, though, was the rigid social structure. Confucianism dictated a strict hierarchy, and if you weren't born into the right class, you might as well have been invisible. At the top were the Yangban, the aristocratic class who lived in luxury. They were the gatekeepers of power, enjoying privileges that made Marie Antoinette's "let them eat cake" moments seem modest. Below them were the Chungin, middle-class professionals who were essentially the silver medalists in the social Olympics. As for the Sangmin, or commoners, and the Chunmin, the lowborn, they were stuck at the bottom like gum on a shoe. This social order, with its rigid class divisions, was more suffocating than a humid Korean summer. The Yangban had the luxury of leisure and education, while the commoners were like the workforce behind the curtain, making sure the show went on. And let's not even get started on the slaves. Yes, slavery was a thing in Joseon, and it wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. Slaves were considered property, bought and sold like livestock. It was a harsh reminder that beneath the glossy surface of a harmonious society lay the grim reality of exploitation. Economically, the Joseon dynasty was a mixed bag of progress and peril. Agriculture was the backbone of the economy, with rice as the main staple. The government implemented land reforms, aiming to increase productivity and tax revenues. But these reforms often favored the Yangban, who could skirt the rules like a master escape artist. For the average farmer, life was a relentless cycle of planting, harvesting, and paying taxes. It was like running on a treadmill that never stopped. Despite these challenges, the Joseon era was also a time of technological advancement. The invention of the rain gauge by Jang Yongsil in the 15th century revolutionized agriculture. Allowing farmers to predict weather patterns more accurately was a small victory in a world where the weather was as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof. But even technological progress had its limits. The benefits often trickled down slowly, like molasses in January, leaving the lower classes scrambling to make ends meet. Let's not ignore the cultural renaissance that bloomed in Joseon. Art, literature, and science flourished, with figures like the philosopher Huang and poet Kim Si-sup leaving indelible marks. The era produced the annals of the Joseon dynasty, an exhaustive record of the reigns of Joseon kings, which today serves as a treasure trove for historians. But like any good plot twist, there's a catch. The intellectual elite who contributed to this cultural wealth were often the same ones who upheld the rigid social structure, ensuring their own privileged status while keeping others out. As we wrap up this historical saga, what's the takeaway? The Joseon dynasty was a paradox, a time of cultural enlightenment shadowed by social rigidity. It set the stage for Korea's modern identity, a blend of tradition and change, myth and reality. The legacy of Joseon is like a beautifully wrapped gift that, upon opening, reveals both treasures and trials. It's a reminder that history is complex, often a patchwork of contradictions. Fast forward to today, and you'll see the echoes of Joseon's past in modern Korea, a society that values education and cultural pride, yet grapples with the remnants of social stratification. The past isn't just a prologue, it's an ongoing narrative that shapes identities and destinies. So, next time you think of Korea's history, remember it's not just about kings and conquests, but also the countless individuals who lived, toiled, and dreamed within its folds. And isn't that the real story worth telling? Think of the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE as the universe's biggest pop-up shop, so expansive it was practically a continent itself. Under the rule of Darius I, this empire stretched its vast tentacles from the Indus Valley all the way to the Aegean Sea. We're talking about an empire that spanned approximately 9 million square miles. Imagine organizing inventory for that Walmart. Darius had his hands full trying to keep this colossal enterprise running smoothly, which might explain why he was so keen on tidying up those pesky Greek city-states. Darius, a man with ambitions as wide as his empire, set his eyes on the Greek world, not out of sheer love for olives and democracy, but for something more pragmatic, revenge and control. You see, the Ionian Revolt from 499 to 493 BCE was like that one mosquito that keeps buzzing around no matter how many times you swat at it. These Ionian Greeks, under Persian rule, decided they'd had enough of the imperial party and started a little rebellion. They even managed to burn down the city of Sardis, a Persian satrapy, with a little help from their mainland Greek cousins from Athens and Eretria. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you, huh? Darius took this revolt as a personal insult. After all, who wouldn't get a bit peeved if someone set fire to their backyard barbecue? Remember the Athenians, he reportedly commanded, a phrase he supposedly had servants remind him of daily. This revolt was the spark that lit the Persian invasions of Greece, a series of conflicts that would shape the Western world like few others. Now, if you think organizing a family road trip is tough, try plotting an invasion of Greece. The classical Greek landscape was, and still is, a logistical nightmare. Picture this: jagged mountain ranges that seem to pop up out of nowhere, like the universe's most inconvenient speed bumps. The coastline, a squiggly line that would give your high school geography teacher nightmares. All this meant that any invading force had to be ready for some serious hiking and a lot of seasickness. This geographical chaos was both a curse and a blessing for the Greeks. On one hand, it made unifying these city-states about as easy as herding cats. Each city had its own government, interests, and often grudges against its neighbors. On the other hand, this fragmented terrain provided the perfect defensive advantage. The Persians, with their vast army, some estimates suggest around 200,000 troops at the peak of their invasions, had to navigate these tricky terrains, stretching their supplies and patience thin. It was like playing a game of Risk, where the board is constantly shifting under your feet. The Ionian Revolt was more than just a rebellious tantrum. It was a declaration that the Greeks were not going to roll over for the Persian juggernaut. It set the stage for a series of epic confrontations, the legends of which have been polished to a high gloss over centuries. But let's not kid ourselves. These conflicts were less about noble ideals and more about gritty survival, stubborn pride, and yes, a fair bit of luck. You might wonder why these Greeks, these fiercely independent city-states, even cared to poke the Persian bear. It wasn't just about autonomy, it was about identity. To the Greeks, their way of life, with its emphasis on individual city-state governance, was worth fighting for. Plus, the idea of being ruled by a distant empire didn't sit well with folks who couldn't even agree on a single form of government among themselves. As we set the stage for the looming showdown between Greece and Persia, remember that this wasn't just a clash of armies, but a collision of worlds. A small, fragmented collection of city-states standing up to a colossal empire was a tall order. Yet, the Greeks had a knack for turning the tables, using their land's natural defenses and their own cunning to outwit a force that should have crushed them like a grape in a wine press. So, buckle up, because this is just the beginning of a saga where geography, grit, and a touch of Greek hubris would defy the odds and change history forever. So here we are, 490 BCE, and the stage is set for a showdown that would make any blockbuster director drool. The Persians, under King Darius I, were determined to teach those cheeky Athenians a lesson they wouldn't forget in a hurry. The stakes? Oh, just the survival of Athens as they knew it. No pressure. Now, let's talk about Marathon, not the kind where you sweat it out for a shiny medal, but the battlefield where around 10,000 Athenians faced off against a Persian force that Herodotus estimated at 25,000, though some modern historians suggest it was closer to 20,000. Still, that's a Persian army outnumbering the Greeks nearly 2-1. The Athenians were the underdogs, the David with a slingshot in a world full of Goliaths, and they knew it. In this David vs. Goliath scenario, the Athenians had one ace up their sleeve, their hoplites. These heavily armored infantrymen fought in a phalanx formation, which was essentially an ancient version of the power of teamwork poster. The Persians, on the other hand, relied on their archers and cavalry. But here's the twist. The battlefield at Marathon was a perfect playground for the Greek infantry. The marshy terrain wasn't exactly welcoming to Persian cavalry, and the Athenians used this to their advantage. Now, enter the masterstroke of Athenian strategy, courtesy of General Miltiades. His plan: charge the Persian lines with a full frontal assault. Bold, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Miltiades thinned out the center of his lines and reinforced the wings. The Athenians ran at the Persians. Yes, ran, in full armor, which is about as comfortable as doing a marathon in a suit of medieval armor. They hit the Persian lines hard, and when the Persians pushed back the weaker Athenian center, the Greek wings enveloped them like a historical bear hug, collapsing the Persian forces into chaos. Amidst this epic clash, let's not forget about the hero of the hour, or is it the legend? Pheidipides, the original marathon man. According to Herodotus, he was sent from Athens to Sparta to request help, covering a distance of about 150 miles in 2 days. That's like running 5 marathons back-to-back, and without the benefit of energy gels or fancy running shoes. But the romanticized legend tells us he later ran from Marathon to Athens, about 26 miles, to announce victory before collapsing and dying on the spot. A bit melodramatic, perhaps. Most historians think so, suggesting the story was embellished to glorify Athenian endurance and valor. Speaking of embellishment, we have Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who had a penchant for storytelling that would make any tabloid journalist proud. He gives us the drama and heroism we crave, but with a side of skepticism. We owe him thanks for preserving these tales, but let's not forget he was writing decades after the fact, relying on hearsay and oral traditions. It's like playing a gigantic game of historical telephone. But what makes this battle truly fascinating isn't just the tactical genius or the legendary marathon run. It's the sheer audacity of it all. The Athenians had everything to lose, yet they stood their ground not just for survival, but for something bigger. This was about protecting a way of life that valued freedom and autonomy over subjugation, and it paid off. The Persians, unable to regroup, retreated to their ships, leaving behind an estimated 400 of their own, while the Athenians lost just 192 soldiers, a staggering contrast that underscored their improbable victory. In the aftermath of Marathon, Athens didn't just survive, it thrived. The victory emboldened the city, fueling a sense of unity and identity that would be pivotal in the years to come. Economically, it was a shot in the arm, boosting trade and confidence. The Athenians had shown that with the right strategy, terrain, and a dash of daring, they could hold their own against the mightiest empire the world had seen. But this was just the opening act. The Persians weren't known for letting bygones be bygones. For Athens and its allies, the specter of Persian retaliation loomed large. The Battle of Marathon was a defining moment, but it was also the beginning of a protracted conflict that would see new alliances, betrayals, and battles that tested the limits of Greek resilience and ingenuity. So, as we leave the fields of Marathon, remember this is not the end. but the prelude to a saga where history, myth, and the human spirit collide in ways that continue to intrigue and inspire. We've seen the Greeks defy odds, but the question remains, how long can they keep punching above their weight? Stay tuned, because the drama is just heating up. As the dust settled over Marathon, the Greeks had barely enough time to toast their victory with a goblet of wine before the ominous shadow of Persian vengeance loomed once more. Fast forward a decade, and we're at 480 BCE, where history's most persistent guest, Xerxes I, son of Darius, decided to RSVP with a vengeance. Picture Xerxes as the kind of guy who simply couldn't take no for an answer. His father's defeat at Marathon was a slight that felt like a Persian rug pulled out from under his empire's feet. So Xerxes had a plan, an encore invasion, bigger, bolder, and with more troops than you'd find at a Spartan boot camp. Now, let's talk numbers, because Xerxes didn't come to Greece with a mere battalion. Estimates of his army size vary as wildly as guesses at a jelly bean counting contest, but we're talking somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 troops. Herodotus, our favorite ancient hype man, claimed it was closer to 2 million, but let's just say he had a flair for the dramatic that could rival any Hollywood scriptwriter. Xerxes' army was like a mobile city, complete with engineers, supply trains, and even a floating bridge across the Hellespont, a construction marvel that was as much a testament to Persian ingenuity as it was to Xerxes' determination. On the Greek side of things, the city-states were in a familiar bind. Herding these fiercely independent polities into a cohesive alliance was like trying to get your cat to play fetch. But the looming Persian threat had a way of focusing priorities. Enter the Spartan, King Leonidas and his 300 warriors, whose names would be etched into legend, though not entirely for the reasons you might think. The Spartans, with their rigorous training and austere lifestyle, were the ancient world's version of special forces. But they weren't alone. In reality, they were joined by a coalition of roughly 7,000 Greeks from various city-states, all ready to make their stand at Thermopylae. Now, Thermopylae, or the Heart Gates, wasn't just a catchy name. It was a narrow coastal pass that turned a potential slaughter into a strategic masterstroke. With the sea on one side and impassable mountains on the other, this bottleneck was the perfect stage for a last stand. Think of it as the historical equivalent of the Alamo, but with more spears and fewer cowboy hats. Here, the Greek forces could use the terrain to neutralize the Persians' numerical advantage, forcing them into a narrow front where only a fraction of their forces could engage at a time. Leonidas and his men were tasked with holding the line long enough for the rest of Greece to muster a more robust defense. This wasn't just about bravado. There was a cold, calculated necessity behind their sacrifice. The Spartans' stand was less a glorious suicide mission and more a strategic gambit to buy time. And here's something that might surprise you. The Spartans were actually at Thermopylae as part of a religious festival back home, the Carnae, which technically should have kept them out of combat. So, Leonidas and his 300 were representing the Spartan commitment without violating religious protocol. Talk about multitasking. The battle itself was a brutal affair, fought over 3 days of relentless combat. The Greeks held their ground with grim determination, their phalanx formation proving devastatingly effective in the narrow pass. Persian waves crashed against the Greek lines, only to be repelled with heavy losses. Imagine trying to run a marathon in a phone booth. That's what it was like for the Persians. Day 1 and 2 saw the Greeks holding their ground, repelling wave after wave of Persian assaults. The casualties were mounting, and Xerxes, no doubt, was feeling the sting of déjà vu. But then came Ephialtes, a name synonymous with betrayal. This local Greek, whose name might as well mean plot twist, revealed a hidden path to the Persians that circumvented the Heart Gates. Picture him as the guy who tells the magician's trick to the audience, only with deadlier consequences. With this crucial intel, a detachment of Persian troops flanked the Greeks, putting them between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, between Persian swords and spears. As the final day dawned, Leonidas and his men knew the gig was up. They faced annihilation with what can only be described as stoic resolve, a characteristic that Spartans practically trademarked. Leonidas reportedly quipped, "Tonight we dine in Hades," proving that gallows humor is as old as warfare itself. In the end, the Greeks fought valiantly, but Leonidas fell, and his men followed him into legend. their sacrifice buying precious time for the rest of Greece. So, what did Xerxes gain from this Pyrrhic victory? A whole lot of bodies, and a morale boost that was shakier than a Persian in a phalanx. The Greek strategy, while costly, had worked to delay the Persian advance, and the Spartan stand at Thermopylae became a rallying cry for Greek resistance. It was a reminder that courage, cunning, and a well-chosen battlefield could level the playing field against overwhelming odds. The political maneuvering behind all this bravery is worth a spotlight, too. The Spartans were acutely aware of their role as both warriors and symbols. Their sacrifice wasn't just a military tactic. It was political theater meant to unify the Greeks against a common foe. The unity forged at Thermopylae wasn't perfect. Greek politics was more of a soap opera than a love story, but it was enough to set in motion a resistance that would culminate in future victories. And speaking of theater, let's not forget how the Battle of Thermopylae has been romanticized over the centuries, polished into a tale of heroism and sacrifice that Hollywood couldn't resist. The image of the 300 Spartans standing alone against a sea of Persians makes for a compelling story, even if it glosses over the thousands of other Greeks who fought and died alongside them. The reality was gritty, the stakes were high, and the outcome, while tragic, was a testament to the power of unity and the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. As the curtain falls on Thermopylae, the stage is set for the next act in this epic saga. The Persians may have won the battle, but the war for Greece's soul was far from over. The seeds of resistance were sown, and the Greeks were not about to let those seeds wither on the vine. Stay tuned, because the drama is just getting started, and the twists and turns are far from over. As the echoes of Thermopylae faded into the annals of history, the Greeks found themselves with a new problem. Xerxes' armada, a veritable floating city that was about to get a taste of Mediterranean hospitality at the Battle of Salamis. Now, if you think this was some leisurely naval parade, think again. This was the ancient equivalent of bumper boats on steroids, minus the life jackets, and with a lot more at stake than just getting splashed. Enter Themistocles, Athenian politician and shrewd tactician, with a plan so audacious it would make a poker player blush. You see, Themistocles understood that while the Persian fleet was vast, estimates range from 600 to 200 ships, it was about as maneuverable as a cruise ship in a bathtub. The Greeks, with their fleet of roughly 370 triremes, were the nimble speedboats in this watery duel. Triremes, for the uninitiated, were the sports cars of the ancient naval world. These sleek ships were powered by 3 rows of oarsmen, approximately 170 per vessel, who must have had the forearms of bodybuilders and the patience of saints. With these marvels of maritime engineering, the Greeks were about to turn the narrow Strait of Salamis into a naval shooting gallery. Themistocles' strategy was simple yet brilliant. Lure the Persian fleet into the cramped confines of the strait, where their numbers would be more of a hindrance than a help. He played a masterstroke of deception, sending a message to Xerxes claiming the Greeks were in disarray and contemplating retreat. Xerxes, ever the sucker for a good ego boost, took the bait and ordered his ships into the trap. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the spectacle of this naval engagement. Imagine hundreds of triremes cutting through the water with the kind of precision that would make a synchronized swimming team jealous. The Greeks struck hard and fast, using their superior knowledge of the local waters to outmaneuver the Persian behemoths. It was like a deadly game of chess, with each trireme a pawn ready to be sacrificed for the greater victory. As the battle raged, the Persians found themselves in dire straits, literally. Their massive ships, designed for open sea warfare, were like bulls in a china shop, unable to turn without bumping into each other or, worse, the rocks. And here's where it gets interesting. While the Greeks were fighting for their homes and freedom, the Persian sailors, many were conscripts from across the vast empire, fighting for a king they probably never even saw. The motivation gap was as wide as the Aegean Sea. Themistocles' gamble paid off. The Greeks' intimate knowledge of their home waters allowed them to hem in the Persian fleet, ramming and boarding the enemy ships with a ferocity that would make a Viking proud. By the end of the day, the Persian navy was in tatters, with losses estimated at around 300 ships, half their fleet. The Greeks, on the other hand, lost around 40 triremes, a testament to their tactical superiority and seafaring prowess. But let's not romanticize this too much. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and bloody. Men fought not just with spears and swords, but with their bare hands, clinging to debris or enemy ships for survival. The sea ran red with the blood of fallen sailors, a grim reminder that even the most legendary of battles are built upon a foundation of human suffering. Xerxes, watching the carnage from a golden throne set upon a hill, reportedly threw a royal-sized tantrum as his ships floundered. His dream of conquering Greece was sinking faster than a rock in the Aegean. Themistocles had turned the tide, quite literally, and in doing so, he didn't just save Athens, but perhaps Western civilization as we know it. No pressure. The economic repercussions were equally significant. The Greek victory secured vital trade routes and boosted Athens' maritime dominance, laying the groundwork for what would become the Athenian Empire. Meanwhile, Xerxes' defeat was a costly blow to Persian prestige and resources, a setback that would take years to recover from. And let's not forget the political fallout. The victory at Salamis was a catalyst for Greek unity, however tenuous it might have been. Themistocles, the man of the hour, became both a hero and a target, as political rivalries simmered beneath the surface. His cunning, which had saved Greece, would eventually lead to his downfall, but that's a story for another time. So, what do we take away from Salamis? That a well-timed, well-executed strategy can turn the tide of history. That even in the face of overwhelming odds, ingenuity and determination can prevail. And that sometimes, all it takes is a bit of Greek chutzpah to outsmart an empire. Keep those togas on, folks, because the saga isn't over yet. There's more drama on the horizon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. But hold on to your helmets, because the saga isn't over yet. If you thought Salamis was the grand finale, meet the Battle of Plataea, a little less famous, but just as important when it comes to kicking Persian ambitions to the curb. Fast forward to 479 BCE, and the Greeks are about to deliver the knockout punch that would send the Persians packing, hopefully for good this time. Plataea was where the Greeks finally decided enough was enough, with the Persian land forces still hanging around Greece like that one guest who doesn't know when to leave the party. The Greeks rallied for what they hoped would be the final showdown. This time, they had the numbers on their side. Around 100,000 Greek hoplites ready to rumble. The Persians, under the command of Mardonius, had a similar number, but let's just say their hearts weren't exactly in it. After all, who wants to be stuck in a foreign land with a boss who keeps moving the goalposts? The Greeks, now veterans of this protracted conflict, knew that unity was their secret weapon. They had learned from the mistakes of the past and were determined not to let internal squabbles get in the way of victory. It was like a dysfunctional family coming together to defeat the neighborhood bully. Everyone had their role, and they were going to play it to perfection. The setting, a plain near the city of Plataea, where the Greeks and Persians squared off in a battle that would decide the fate of Greece. For the Greeks, this was not just about survival. It was an opportunity to send a message. No more divided city-states, no more Persian meddling. This was about asserting their independence and proving that brains and brawn could topple an empire. As the battle unfolded, the Greeks used their superior armor and tactics to great effect. The Persian cavalry, usually a devastating force, found themselves bogged down in rough terrain. Picture them trying to navigate a minefield with blindfolds on, awkward and ineffective. Meanwhile, the Greek hoplites, with their phalanx formation, pushed forward like a disciplined wall of bronze. It was a clash of styles and strategies, but the Greeks had the edge, both literally and figuratively. Mardonius, in a last-ditch attempt at victory, launched a full-scale assault on the Greek lines. But here's where things went south for the Persians. In the chaos of battle, Mardonius was struck down, and with his death, the Persian morale crumbled faster than a cookie in a toddler's hands. The Greeks seized the moment, launching a counterattack that shattered the Persian forces. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with Persian casualties, estimated at around 40,000, while the Greeks suffered far fewer losses. With Plataea, the Greeks had not only won a battle but secured their future. The Persian threat was effectively neutralized, and Greece was free to pursue its own destiny without foreign interference. Economically, the victory opened the floodgates for trade and prosperity. The city-states, particularly Athens, capitalized on this newfound security to expand their influence, setting the stage for a cultural and political renaissance. Now, let's talk about Athens, the scrappy city-state that emerged from the Persian Wars as the ancient equivalent of a rock star. With the Persians out of the way, Athens seized the opportunity to build an empire of its own, spearheading the Delian League, an alliance of Greek city-states that would eventually morph into the Athenian Empire. And boy, did they go to town. We're talking about building projects that would make any modern city planner envious. The Parthenon, anyone. Athens became a beacon of culture and democracy, a superpower in its own right, boasting an economy bolstered by trade and tribute. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this golden age. The rise of Athens was as much about ambition and power as it was about art and philosophy. The city-state's dominance brought wealth, yes, but also tension and rivalry. Sparta, in particular, wasn't thrilled about playing second fiddle, setting the stage for future conflict. The Peloponnesian War was lurking around the corner, and Athens' imperial aspirations would eventually come home to roost. As for the cultural impact, the Persian Wars left a legacy that resonates to this day. The Greeks, especially the Athenians, were inspired to think big, really big. This period saw the flowering of philosophy, drama, and science, with figures like Socrates, Sophocles, and Hippocrates pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and creativity. It was a time of intellectual ferment that laid the foundations for Western civilization, shaping ideas about governance, art, and the human condition. And then there's the enduring mythology. The Persian Wars became the stuff of legend, romanticized and retold through the ages. From Herodotus' histories to Hollywood's blockbusters, the tales of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea have captured our imaginations. We love a good underdog story, and the Greeks' vs. Persian saga delivers in spades. It's a narrative of defiance, ingenuity, and triumph against all odds, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be humbled by a determined few. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was far messier and more complex than the legends suggest. The Greeks were not noble heroes fighting for lofty ideals. They were people, flawed and driven by the same desires and fears as us. The wars were brutal, the politics cutthroat, and the stakes life or death. Yet, through it all, the Greeks persevered, leaving a legacy that continues to shape our world. So, as we wrap up this epic journey through the Persian Wars, what can we take away? Perhaps it's the idea that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experience. The Greeks taught us that courage and cunning can overcome even the greatest of odds, that unity can forge strength from diversity, and that the quest for freedom is a timeless pursuit. In the end, the Greek victories over Persia were about more than just military triumphs. They were about defining what it meant to be Greek, and by extension, what it means to be human. It's a story that reminds us of the power of resilience and the potential for greatness, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. And isn't that a narrative worth remembering? So here's to the Greeks, the Persians, and the timeless lessons of history. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history isn't just about what happened, it's about why it still matters. Young Thomas More, born in 1478, could have been your typical medieval kid, if not for his penchant for razor-sharp wit, and an uncanny ability to annoy just about everyone with his clever wordplay. This was not some Hogwarts fantasy world where everyone admired the snark. Rather, it was a society where a well-placed word could land you in hot water, or worse, in the stocks. But More was fearless, and his tongue was as sharp as his mind. Now, if you were to wander through the bustling streets of London in the late 15th century, you'd find little Thomas running around the shadow of St. Paul's Cathedral, likely muttering Latin phrases to himself, because, hey, that's what precocious kids did back then. His dad, John More, was a prominent lawyer, and he had big plans for his son. He wasn't about to let young Thomas waste his talents on street games and idle chatter. Nope, the elder More had his eyes set on the legal profession for his son, and thus Thomas was packed off to study at Oxford around 1492. Here, he developed a love-hate relationship with academia, but more importantly, he honed his skill for linguistic gymnastics. By the tender age of 14, More was already making waves with his intellect. Now, Oxford in the 1490 was no Ivy League campus with sprawling grounds and gourmet cafeterias. It was a place where students often lived in squalid conditions, subsisting on a diet that could generously be described as bleak. But young Thomas thrived, diving into the works of Plato and Aristotle, and more importantly, mastering the art of rhetoric. the 15th century version of a Tudor roast. But let's face it, no one sails through their education without a few mishaps. More's knack for wordplay sometimes landed him in trouble. Imagine this, a room full of wannabe scholars, each trying to outdo the other with their knowledge of ancient texts. In walks Thomas, who could silence a room with a well-timed quip about Cicero that left his classmates both impressed and slightly irked. It was this combination of intelligence and irreverence that would set the stage for his future career. Once he returned to London, More didn't just slip into the dusty annals of law. Instead, he quickly made a name for himself as a lawyer, a profession that was as much about charm and cunning as it was about legal knowledge. In 1504, More was elected to Parliament, and one can only imagine the scene. A young, sharp-tongued lawyer stepping into the political arena, ready to spar with the seasoned veterans. This was a time when the English Parliament was more of a chaotic free-for-all than the structured institution we know today. The pay wasn't exactly stellar either. MPs were often more motivated by the chance to influence policy than by their meager salaries. More's legal acumen soon caught the attention of the powerful. He became a close confidant of Henry Roman VII, and later, Henry Roman VIII. But don't be fooled into thinking this was all glitz and glamour. Court life was a minefield of intrigue, and one wrong word could see you falling out of favor faster than you could say royal decree. More was a master of the political dance, but he wasn't immune to the perils of courtly life. One particularly awkward moment at court involved a banquet where More was expected to toast the king, a seemingly simple task, unless you happened to be Thomas More. With a room full of nobles watching, More stood, goblet in hand, and delivered a toast so laden with double entendre that it left everyone guessing whether he was praising the king or poking fun at him. Some say the king was amused, others claim he was not. Either way, More walked away with his head still attached, which was no small feat. More's early career was marked by an ability to balance humor with gravitas, a tightrope walk that few could manage. His wordplay was legendary, his legal skills unmatched, and his social maneuvering deft. Yet, beneath the layers of wit and charm was a man deeply committed to his principles, a trait that would both define and doom him in the years to come. As More's influence grew, so did his list of adversaries. Not everyone appreciated his knack for saying exactly what he thought, regardless of the consequences. But perhaps that was the essence of Thomas More, a man who believed in truth and the power of words, even when the stakes were high. As we'll see in his later life, this commitment would lead him to pen one of the most enduring works in political philosophy. But for now, young Thomas was content to court both friends and foes with his razor-sharp wit and undeniable charm. As More's star ascended in the Tudor court, he found himself in the precarious role of advisor to none other than Henry Roman VIII. Now, Henry Roman VIII was a king who could be described as complicated. Picture a man with the ego the size of his waistline and a penchant for marrying or divorcing wives like someone changing socks. Being his advisor was a bit like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle, thrilling, dangerous, and downright absurd. Thomas More, with his razor-sharp wit and unwavering principles, was a natural fit for this courtly circus. His role was to provide wise counsel, although what wise meant could change depending on the king's mood. More managed to navigate this minefield with the skill of a seasoned diplomat most of the time. But even someone as deft as More couldn't escape the occasional diplomatic faux pas. One infamous episode involved a discussion about taxes, a topic that was about as beloved as a plague outbreak. More allegedly quipped about the king's spending habits, comparing them to a sieve that couldn't hold water. In a court where flattery was currency, that kind of honesty was like trying to pay for groceries with monopoly money. Yet More's influence was undeniable. He had a front-row seat to the political theatre of Tudor England, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. His clashes with Martin Luther are the stuff of legend, though the reality was more ink-stained than cinematic. Luther, the monk-turned-revolutionary, was busy turning the religious world on its head with his 95 Theses, and More, a devout Catholic, was not amused. Their exchanges were less about religious enlightenment and more akin to a 16th-century Tudor feud, each one trying to outdo the other in theological insults. More once described Luther's writings as swarming with 1,000 pestilential heresies, which, even by today's standards, was pretty harsh. But let's not forget the economic backdrop to all this high-stakes drama. The Tudor court was an expensive place to hang your hat. Henry Roman VIII royal household alone cost an eye-watering £42,000 a year, a staggering sum when you consider that a skilled craftsman earned about £10 annually. Staying in royal favour wasn't just about avoiding the king's wrath. It was also about keeping the financial taps flowing. More's own household expenses were modest by comparison, but the pressure to keep up appearances was relentless. It was a world where a single banquet could cost more than a peasant earned in a year, and where the wrong outfit at court could see you relegated to the social sidelines. More was acutely aware of these pressures, and it only added to the absurdity of Tudor politics. His ability to wield influence came not just from his intellect, but also his understanding of the economic levers at play. He knew that maintaining royal favour was as much about managing the king's whims as it was about delivering sage advice. It was a delicate balance, and More walked this tightrope with the agility of a seasoned acrobat. Yet, beneath the veneer of courtly life lay the harsh realities of political power. More's relationship with Henry Roman VIII was like a game of chess where the stakes were life and death, and the rules could change without notice. The king was notorious for his volatile temper, and More knew that one wrong move could cost him more than just his position. Despite the risks, More remained steadfast in his principles, a trait that would ultimately lead to his downfall. So, as we peer through the fog of history, it's tempting to romanticize More as the clever courtier who outwitted his rivals. But the truth is, he was a man of conviction caught in the whirlwind of Tudor politics, where wit was both a weapon and a shield. His clashes with Martin Luther, his political maneuvering, and his role as Henry Roman VIII advisor paint a picture of a man who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. As we leave More in the corridors of power, remember that his story is far from over. The political and religious storms that were brewing would soon test his resolve in ways that even his sharpest quips couldn't deflect. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of Thomas More, a man whose legacy would be defined not by his proximity to power, but by his unwavering belief in the power of words and principles. Amidst the labyrinth of Tudor politics, Thomas More found solace in his writing, crafting a work that would outlast even the most enduring of his quips, Utopia. Now, don't be fooled by its name. This wasn't some starry-eyed blueprint for a flawless society, but rather a satirical swipe at the societal norms of 16th-century Europe. Written in 1516, Utopia wasn't just a book. It was a literary hand grenade tossed into the parlor of European thought, challenging the status quo with a cheeky grin. More's Utopia is like a Renaissance-era roast, an elaborate concoction of satire and philosophy that skewers the political and social practices of his day. The book is divided into two parts, with the first setting the stage in a fictional dialogue among More himself, Peter Giles, and Raphael Hythloday, a traveller with tales as tall as Henry Roman VIII dining bill. The second part lays out the societal structure of the island of Utopia, a place where private property doesn't exist, gold is used for chamber pots, and everyone works only 6 hours a day. Sounds like paradise, right? Well, not so fast. More's Utopia was a society where people lived by reason and everything was shared communally. But here's the kicker. More wasn't painting an idyllic picture. He was poking fun at the absurdities of both his own society and the very idea of a perfect world. For instance, in Utopia, the magistrate's only job was to ensure that nobody sat around idle, a thinly veiled jab at the inefficiencies of European governance. The Utopians were like the ultimate efficiency experts, a stark contrast to the wasteful extravagance More saw at Henry's court. Despite its satirical nature, Utopia wasn't just a punchline. It was a reflection of More's deep-seated concerns about the moral and social issues of his time. England in the early 16th century was a land of stark contrasts. The rich lived in opulence, while the poor scraped by in abject poverty. The enclosure movement was spreading, transforming common lands into profit-driven pastures for sheep, leaving peasants displaced and destitute. More's critique of private property was not an endorsement of communism, an anachronistic label, but rather a commentary on the greed that he saw widening the chasm between the haves and have-nots. Yet, let's not romanticize More as a proto-socialist hero. He was a man of his time, deeply entwined in the fabric of a society he also critiqued. He was no revolutionary, but his work did light a fire under the feet of those who saw Utopia as an attainable goal for social reform. Some readers took it all a bit too literally, believing More had stumbled upon a perfect society blueprint, ready for implementation. The irony is palpable. More's biting satire was misread as earnest advocacy, a testament to the complexity of his prose and the gullibility of his audience. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that Utopia has been cited by everyone from Karl Marx to contemporary politicians, each interpreting it through the lens of their own agendas. More's work has been both lauded and lambasted, held up as a mirror to the human condition and a cautionary tale about the perils of idealism. Today, we might compare his fictional island to any number of modern utopian projects, from intentional communities to Silicon Valley's tech-driven paradises, each promising a better world just around the corner. But here's a cold splash of reality. Utopian ideals often crumble under the weight of human nature. Our penchant for greed, power, and self-interest tends to turn even the noblest experiments into dystopian nightmares. More knew this, and his work was a clever critique of the very notion that humans could, or should, strive for perfection. Utopia was less a guidebook and more a conversation starter, a way to question the systems we live under without offering neat solutions wrapped in a bow. So was Thomas More a dreamer, or was he laughing at us from across the centuries? The answer is a resounding both. More's genius lay in his ability to weave together critique and comedy, leaving us to unravel the tangled threads. His Utopia remains a testament to the enduring power of satire, a reminder that sometimes the best way to provoke change is to hold up a mirror and chuckle at our own absurdities. As we leave Utopia and its misunderstood legacy, remember that More's story is still unfolding. His wit and wisdom would soon be tested in the fiery crucible of Tudor politics, where his principles would be both his shield and his undoing. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of Thomas More, a man whose words continue to resonate, challenging us to question, to laugh, and to dream of a world that might never exist but is worth striving for nonetheless. Thomas More's life was a masterclass in irony, a man who penned a satire about perfect societies only to be caught in the very real and imperfect gears of Tudor politics. As we shift gears from his literary exploits, let's wade into the murkier waters of his later life, where his principles will be tested against the formidable tides of Henry Roman VIII ambitions. Now, Henry Roman VIII wasn't exactly known for his subtlety. This was a king whose love life could fill a season of a reality TV show, each episode more jaw-dropping than the last. The man was on a matrimonial merry-go-round, and when his marriage to Catherine of Aragon failed to produce a male heir, Henry decided it was time for a new wife. Enter Anne Boleyn, stage right, but there was a tiny snag, a Catholic one. The Pope, not particularly keen on granting a divorce, left Henry looking for a workaround. Enter Thomas More, our would-be hero, thrust into the role of Lord Chancellor in 1529. Now, More was no stranger to the king's whims, but this was a whole new level of crazy. Henry wanted More to support his break from the Catholic Church, essentially to say, "Sure, boss, go ahead and start your own church. What could possibly go wrong?" More, a devout Catholic with a stubborn streak, wasn't about to toe the line. He refused to endorse the divorce, setting off a chain reaction that would lead him straight to the Tower of London. More's refusal was less about Anne Boleyn and more about an unyielding belief in the Catholic Church's authority. He wasn't about to swap his spiritual loyalty for royal favor, even as Henry started reshuffling the ecclesiastical deck like a card sharp at a poker table. So what does a king do when his top guy won't play ball? Simple. You push, prod, and eventually imprison. More's moral stand, in the face of royal pressure, was about as popular as a tax collector at a peasant's feast. In 1534, Henry Roman VIII dropped the Act of Supremacy like a bombshell, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England. The act required all subjects to swear an oath acknowledging the king's new title and the legitimacy of his marriage to Anne. It was a line in the sand, and More, true to form, refused to cross it. Refusing to take the oath was akin to signing your own death warrant, but More stood firm, even as the storm clouds gathered overhead. Now, let's talk numbers. Because in Tudor England, everything had a price tag, especially your head. More's refusal cost him his liberty, and he found himself imprisoned in the Tower of London, a grim fortress with walls that had heard the last words of many a fallen noble. Life in the Tower was no picnic. More's cell was about as cozy as a medieval broom closet, with none of the creature comforts of his previous life. His diet went from feasts to famine, and the only view was a bleak horizon through iron bars. But More was nothing if not resilient. Even in the Tower, he managed to keep his humor intact, penning witty letters to his family and friends. His words were a lifeline, a reminder that while his body was captive, his mind was free. Yet, beneath the quips and jests lay a sobering reality. More's principles had led him to a place where few emerged with their heads still attached. The trial of Thomas More was a theatrical affair, a courtroom drama that would make even the most seasoned Hollywood screenwriter raise an eyebrow. It was held on July 1, 1535, in Westminster Hall, a venue more accustomed to royal banquets than judicial proceedings. The charges: treason, for refusing to recognize Henry's ecclesiastical supremacy. The jury, stacked like a lopsided poker hand, needed little convincing. More's fate was sealed before the ink on the indictment had dried. More defended himself with the eloquence of a man who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of rhetoric. But this was no academic debate. The stakes were as high as they get: his head. More argued that his silence could not be construed as treason, quoting the legal maxim, qui tacit consentia vita. Silence gives consent. The tragedy was that the court saw his silence not as consent, but as defiance. The sentence was death by hanging, drawing, and quartering, a gruesome spectacle designed to deter would-be dissenters. But Henry, in a rare moment of mercy, or perhaps a publicity stunt, commuted the sentence to beheading. Even in death, More was a man who could draw a crowd. On July 6, 1535, he mounted the scaffold at Tower Hill, his wit as sharp as ever. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first," he declared, a final quip that echoed through history. And so, Thomas More met his end, a man whose unwavering principles led him to the executioner's block. His death was a stark reminder of the high price of integrity in a world where loyalty to the king could demand the ultimate sacrifice. Yet, his story doesn't end here. His legacy lived on, both as a cautionary tale and an enduring testament to the power of words and conviction. As we pause at this pivotal moment in More's life, remember that his tale is far from over. The impact of his choices reverberated through the centuries, challenging us to ponder the delicate dance between power and principle. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life and legacy of Thomas More, a man whose story is as complex as the times in which he lived, and whose words continue to challenge and inspire. Thomas More's story doesn't just end with the chopping block. In fact, that's where it gets interesting, at least for those of us who enjoy a good posthumous legacy analysis. This is where More transforms from a man of flesh and bone into a figure of myth and legend, a metamorphosis that would have likely amused him as much as it puzzled him. More was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1935, effectively turning him into the poster boy for standing up to royal overreach. Yet, this sanctification is a bit like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. More was, after all, a complex character, as flawed as he was principled. The romantic image of More as a saint is somewhat at odds with the reality of the man. He was, in many ways, a product of his time, a staunch Catholic who, let's not forget, wasn't exactly the most tolerant of religious dissenters himself. More had a hand in the persecution of Protestants, a fact conveniently swept under the rug in many accounts of his life. It's as if people chose to focus on the glossy cover of Utopia while ignoring the less palatable chapters of his biography. The irony is deliciously inescapable. The man who wrote a satire on the idea of perfection is now enshrined as a model of virtue. Then there's Utopia, his most enduring work, which has been both lauded and misinterpreted across the centuries. This literary concoction has been romanticized as a blueprint for an ideal society, yet more likely intended it as a critique of those very ideals. Written in 1516, Utopia has been adopted by everyone from socialists to capitalists, each seeing in it what they want to see. It's like a Rorschach test for political theorists. a mirror reflecting back whatever ideology you hold dear. But let's be clear, More wasn't advocating for socialism or capitalism. He was critiquing the inconsistencies and absurdities of 16th century European society. The book remains a testament to the power of satire to spark conversation and provoke thought, even if many readers miss the joke. Fast forward a few centuries, and More's influence is still palpable in political thought. In 2000, Utopia was ranked among the 100 most important works of Western civilization by the Modern Library, a testament to its enduring relevance. It continues to be a touchstone for discussions on governance, social justice, and the human condition. Yet, the real genius of Utopia lies not in any prescriptive solutions it offers, because let's face it, it offers none, but in its ability to challenge us to question the status quo. It's a reminder that every society is flawed, and that the pursuit of a perfect world is as treacherous as it is tantalizing. More's legacy is a fascinating blend of myth and reality, a cocktail of contradictions that reflect the complexity of the man himself. He was a passionate defender of his faith, yet his actions sometimes contradicted the teachings of that same faith. He was a man of words, yet those words were often as sharp as daggers. And while his death elevated him to the status of martyr, it's worth noting that martyrdom was not part of his plan. He was a man caught in the crosshairs of history, and his story is a cautionary tale about the perils of power and the price of principle. In today's world, More's life and works continue to resonate, offering lessons in everything from religious tolerance to political integrity. His refusal to compromise his beliefs, even in the face of death, serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for one's convictions. Yet, it's also a reminder that such stands often come at a high cost, a cost that More paid with his life. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Thomas More, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to a man who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. His story is a tapestry of paradoxes, woven together with threads of wit, wisdom, and unwavering conviction. More's legacy challenges us to look beyond the romanticized versions of history and to confront the messy realities that lie beneath. In doing so, we honor not just the man he was, but the complex tapestry of human history he represents. And perhaps, if he were here today, More would give us that trademark wry smile, reminding us that the pursuit of truth is as much about asking the right questions as it is about finding the right answers. In the tumultuous whirlpool that was the Warring States period, a baby named Myeongseong was born in 259 BC in the state of Qin, an unlikely setting for someone destined to unite a fractured land. At the time, China was less a unified country and more a patchwork quilt of constantly bickering states. Think of it as a chaotic game of Risk, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Myeongseong, though, was about to roll the dice and change the game completely. Now, let's talk about his family life, an ancient soap opera with a cast of characters that would make even Shakespeare blush. Myeongseong's mother, Lady Zhao, was the concubine of a merchant named Lu Bue. Lu was a crafty fellow who managed to climb the social ladder by becoming the Chancellor of Qin. Here's where it gets juicy. Lu orchestrated a situation where Lady Zhao, already pregnant, allegedly with Lu's child, was married off to Zichu, the Prince of Qin. Zichu was in exile at the time, but Lu had a plan to bring him back to the fold. This makes Myeongseong's paternity a bit of a head-scratcher, and palace gossips had a field day with it. It's like the ancient equivalent of a paternity test episode on a daytime talk show, except nobody dared to throw chairs in the Emperor's court. Despite the dodgy DNA drama, Myeongseong was raised as the legitimate heir. The political climate was more cutthroat than a reality TV show, with assassination attempts lurking around every corner. It's said that he survived multiple attempts on his life as a child, including one involving a lead-filled crossbow bolt. Talk about growing up with some serious trust issues. At the tender age of 13, Myeongseong ascended to the throne of Qin, though under the regency of Lu Bue. The state of Qin was already a militaristic powerhouse, but the young king had bigger fish to fry or roast, given the era's fondness for large feasts. With Lu Bue pulling the strings, the court was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing. Some historians speculate that this was the original location for the phrase, "Keep your friends close but your enemies closer," as Ying Zheng had to navigate a minefield of familial betrayal and power plays. As Ying Zheng grew older, it became clear he was more of a chess player than a pawn. He started to assert his authority, much to the chagrin of Lu Bue. Let's pause for a second to appreciate the audacity of a teenager telling a seasoned politician to take a back seat. By his late teens, Ying Zheng was ready to step out of Lu Bue's shadow. In a move worthy of any power struggle manual, Ying Zheng sidelined Lu and took full control of the throne. Lu Bue, in a last desperate attempt to retain influence, gifted the king with a harem of 100 women. Ying Zheng, unimpressed by this ancient form of bribery, sent Lu packing to the political wilderness. With Lu Bue out of the picture, Ying Zheng could focus on his main goal, unifying China. At this point, the Warring States period was a century-long free-for-all, with 7 major states duking it out like gladiators in an arena. Ying Zheng was the kind of guy who looked at a fractured landscape and saw a puzzle to solve, not an insurmountable mess. His strategy, conquest by any means necessary, whether through diplomacy or sheer brute force. Under his rule, Qin's military became an unstoppable juggernaut. He adopted legalism as the state's guiding philosophy, a system that makes Machiavelli look like a kindergarten teacher. Legalism emphasized strict laws, harsh punishments, and the idea that everyone was guilty until proven innocent. It was the ultimate my way or the highway approach, and it worked. With this draconian code, Ying Zheng whipped his state into a lean, mean, conquering machine. By his late 20s, Ying Zheng had already started gobbling up neighboring states like a kid in a candy store. His tactics were often brutal, but undeniably effective. The guy was a one-man unification committee, setting the stage for what would become an empire that stretched from the Yellow Sea to the borders of modern-day Vietnam. Still, the road to unification was anything but smooth. His adversaries were no slouches, and they threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at him. But Ying Zheng was a master of turning enemies against each other, employing spies, and even encouraging defections to weaken his foes from within. He was the grandmaster of political chess, and his opponents often found themselves in checkmate before they even realized they were playing. Yet, amid all this military genius, Ying Zheng's personal life remained a tangled web. His questionable lineage continued to haunt him, a constant whisper in the corridors of power. Despite, or perhaps because of, this, he was determined to leave a legacy that no one could question. His ambition was as limitless as the great wall he would later commission, and his determination was as unyielding as the terracotta soldiers he would have crafted for his tomb. In the end, Ying Zheng's rise to power was a perfect storm of ambition, cunning, and sheer will. He was the boy king who grew up in a snake pit of intrigue and betrayal, only to emerge as the first emperor of a united China. It's a tale that combines elements of a thriller, a family drama, and a strategic masterclass that reshaped the course of history. And to think, it all started with a child whose legitimacy was as murky as a palace moat. Stay tuned for more on how this kid from Qin went from surviving assassination attempts to becoming the architect of an empire. As Qin Shi Huang marched towards his grand vision of a unified China, he wasn't exactly playing nice. Think less about a benevolent ruler and more about a ruthless chess master willing to sacrifice pawns. Except in this case, the pawns were entire states. His campaign to unite the 7 warring states was like a high-stakes game of Monopoly, except instead of hotels and houses, he was dealing in armies and provinces. The state of Qin became the ultimate powerhouse, and Ying Zheng, now Qin Shi Huang, was the man with his finger on the trigger. First on the menu was the state of Han, a tasty appetizer for the ambitious Qin army. Han, sandwiched between Qin and its other targets, was the low-hanging fruit for Qin Shi Huang's expansionist feast. In 230 BC, the Qin forces marched in with all the subtlety of a rock concert, sending Han's defenses crumbling like a house of cards. This was the opening act in a series of conquests that would leave a trail of blood, sweat, and tears, or more accurately, blood, sweat, and lots of broken pottery. Next up was Zhao. And here's where things got particularly gnarly. The Battle of Changping in 260 BC, which preceded the final conquest in 228 BC, is a legendary tale of military strategy and merciless brutality. The Qin army, led by General Bai Kai, nicknamed the Butcher of Zhao, for reasons that will soon become obvious, managed to trap the Zhao forces. What followed was a massacre that saw some 400,000 Zhao soldiers executed after surrendering. Yeah, a bloodbath might be an understatement here. Qin Shi Huang's message was clear. Surrender was not an option if you wanted to keep your head attached to your body. The Qin military machine, fueled by legalist philosophy, was a well-oiled juggernaut. They weren't just about brute force. They were all about efficiency and innovation. The Qin forces employed a highly organized command structure and were pioneers in using iron weapons and crossbows, giving them a technological edge over their rivals. It was like showing up to a sword fight with a machine gun. Not exactly a fair fight, but hey, all's fair in love and war, right? And speaking of war, let's talk logistics. The Qin state invested heavily in infrastructure to support its military campaigns. They built roads and canals that would make any modern urban planner swoon. The King's road network was a literal highway to hell for Qin's enemies, allowing troops to move at breakneck speed across vast distances. These roads were like the ancient version of a FedEx express lane, except instead of delivering packages, they were delivering doom. But the conquest wasn't just about military might. It was also about psychological warfare. Qin Shi Huang knew that fear was as effective a weapon as any sword. He spread rumors and misinformation, sowing discord among the enemy ranks. The man was a master of mind games, and he played them with the finesse of a Las Vegas card shark. His ability to manipulate public perception made him a terrifying opponent, one who could make even the bravest generals second-guess their next move. Of course, all this conquest came at a cost, and I'm not just talking about the staggering human toll. The financial burden was immense. War is expensive business, folks. The campaigns drained the state's coffers, demanding ever more taxes and resources from the people. The Qin state was like a ravenous beast, constantly feeding on the blood, sweat, and coin of its subjects. The economy was stretched thinner than a cheap bedsheet, but as long as Qin Shi Huang saw progress, he was willing to pay the price. The conquest of Wei in 225 BC added another medal to Qin Shi Huang's chest of triumphs. The Qin forces used a cunning maneuver by redirecting the Yellow River to flood the Wei capital of Dalian, forcing a swift surrender. Talk about thinking outside the box, or, in this case, the riverbank. This tactic was both ingenious and devastating, showcasing Qin Shi Huang's knack for creative destruction. As Qin Shi Huang checked off state after state from his list, the myth of the invincible Qin army grew. But let's not get carried away here. The Qin forces were far from invincible. They faced setbacks, desertions, and the constant threat of rebellion. The legend of an unstoppable force was as much propaganda as it was reality, and it served its purpose well. By the time Yan and Dai fell in 226 BC, followed by the conquest of Chu in 223 BC, the Qin army's reputation had done half the work for them. Fear and legend were as effective as any spear or shield. The final act in this bloody saga was the annexation of Kai in 221 BC, which surrendered without much of a fight. By this point, the other states were like dominoes, just waiting for the final push. The unification of China was complete, and Qin Shi Huang stood atop the ashes of his enemies, the architect of an empire that would forever bear his mark. While the romantic notion of a grand unifier might captivate the imagination, the reality was far grimmer. The human toll was incalculable. Entire generations were lost to war, and the scars of conquest were etched into the landscape and the collective memory of the people. Qin Shi Huang's empire was built on a foundation of bones, a testament to both his relentless ambition and the brutal cost of his vision. And yet, amid the bloodshed and devastation, there was an undeniable allure to Qin Shi Huang's achievements. The man who began his reign with a questionable pedigree had forged a new identity as the first emperor of a united China. His legacy was a complex tapestry of awe-inspiring feats and chilling ruthlessness, a paradox of grandeur and terror that continues to fascinate historians and casual observers alike. So, what do we take away from this tale of conquest and carnage? It's a story of ambition without limits, where the lines between hero and villain blur into a shadowy grey. Qin Shi Huang was a man who dared to dream big, even if it meant trampling over the dreams of others. His empire was both a marvel and a warning, a reminder that power, when unchecked, can create empires, but also destroy them. As we move forward in this epic saga, remember that the man behind the myth was as flawed as the rest of us, driven by the same desires and fears that have fueled human endeavors since time immemorial. Stay tuned, because the story of Qin Shi Huang is far from over. As we continue this saga of grandiosity and grit, it's time to dive into the brainchild of Qin Shi Huang's ambitious mind, his monumental projects. These weren't your run-of-the-mill civic improvements. No, these were colossal undertakings that would make modern infrastructure projects look like weekend DIY jobs. We're talking about the early Great Wall and that mysterious mausoleum guarded by an army of terracotta soldiers. These were the crown jewels of a ruler who wasn't content with merely uniting China. He wanted to leave a legacy that screamed, "I was here," to all of eternity. Let's kick things off with the Great Wall, or rather, its earliest incarnation. Qin Shi Huang wasn't the first to think of building a wall. Various states had already constructed sections to keep out pesky nomadic tribes. But our man Qin had a vision to connect these disparate pieces into a fortified line stretching across the northern frontier. And when you're trying to keep out the likes of the Xiongnu, think of them as the original marauding barbarians. This wall wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about survival. Now, here's where things get gritty. The Great Wall wasn't built with volunteer labor or weekend warriors looking for a new hobby. No, this was a massive exercise in conscription, with an estimated 300,000 workers dragged into service. Imagine being told, "Congratulations, you've been chosen to build a wall in the middle of nowhere. Pack warm clothes, it's chilly up north." For many, it was a one-way ticket, no round trip guaranteed. The conditions were brutal, the pay was non-existent, and the death toll was staggering. The wall wasn't just built on the backs of laborers, it was built on their bones. But why, you might ask, did Qin Shi Huang go to such lengths? Part of it was practicality. The wall served as a deterrent against invasions, a line in the sand that said, "This is China, keep out." But it was also about control. By conscripting laborers from across the empire, Qin Shi Huang forced his newly conquered subjects to work side by side, breaking down regional loyalties and fostering a sense of unity, or at least shared misery. It was a forced team-building exercise on a national scale, complete with the kind of grueling conditions that make you question your life choices. The economic impact was equally profound. The resources poured into the wall were immense. Materials, food, and manpower all diverted from other sectors. It's estimated that the construction of the wall consumed a significant portion of the empire's GDP, a testament to the sheer scale of Qin Shi Huang's ambitions. But this wasn't just a financial burden, it was a logistical nightmare. Supply lines stretched to the breaking point, and the sheer effort of maintaining such a vast project strained the empire's resources to the limit. It was the ancient equivalent of a government pouring billions into a space program while its citizens struggled to make ends meet. And then there's the mausoleum, a project so grand it makes the Great Wall look like a high school woodworking project. Qin Shi Huang's final resting place, with its legendary army of terracotta warriors, was a testament to his obsession with the afterlife. This was a man who planned to rule in death as he did in life, and he wasn't going to do it alone. Around 700,000 laborers were conscripted to build this subterranean empire, a sprawling necropolis that was as much about ego as it was about eternity. The mausoleum's construction was shrouded in secrecy, and for a good reason. This was a work of art, a microcosm of the empire, complete with rivers of mercury, and a ceiling studded with pearls to mimic the night sky. It said that workers were sealed inside the tomb to keep its secrets safe, a grim reminder that Qin Shi Huang's vision of control extended beyond the grave. The terracotta warriors themselves are a marvel of craftsmanship, each one unique, a silent testament to the artistic prowess of the Qin artisans. But let's not romanticize it too much. These weren't volunteers doing it for the love of art. They were conscripted laborers, working under the threat of death, producing beauty through blood, sweat, and tears. Economically, the mausoleum was a money pit. Imagine funneling massive resources into a project with no return on investment, except perhaps some serious bragging rights in the afterlife. The financial strain on the empire was immense, but in Qin Shi Huang's mind, it was a worthwhile expense. He wasn't about to spend eternity in a second-rate tomb, after all. These projects, while awe-inspiring, paint a picture of an emperor whose vision was as ruthless as it was grand. Qin Shi Huang's reign is often romanticized as a golden age of unification and progress, but beneath the surface, it was a time of harsh realities. His draconian policies, enforced through legalism, created a society bound by fear and repression. The same strategies that allowed him to conquer and build also sowed the seeds of discontent and rebellion. The human cost of his ambitions was staggering, and while he may have unified China, he did so by leaving a trail of human suffering in his wake. The romantic vision of a great unifier is seductive, but it glosses over the harsh truth. Qin Shi Huang's legacy was built on a foundation of enforced labor and relentless control. His achievements were monumental, but so was the misery inflicted on those who lived under his rule. In the end, Qin Shi Huang's grand projects tell a story of a ruler who was both visionary and tyrant, a man who saw himself as a god among men, but whose legacy is as much about the cost of his dreams as it is about their grandeur. As we look to the future chapters of his story, remember that the line between genius and madness is often as thin as the bricks of the Great Wall itself. Stay tuned, because the tale of Qin Shi Huang is far from over, and there are more twists in this historical epic than in a river of mercury. Qin Shi Huang's reign was as ambitious as it was aggressive, and his pursuit of eternal life was no exception. The first emperor of China, having already conquered death in a metaphorical sense by uniting the fractured states under one rule, turned his sights on a more literal conquest, immortality. Because what's the point of ruling an empire if you're just going to kick the bucket like every other mortal, right? So began Qin Shi Huang's infamous quest for the elixir of life, a journey that was as bizarre as it was futile, and which ultimately highlighted the tragic irony of his reign. Let's dive into the alchemical circus that was Qin Shi Huang's court. The emperor was convinced that somewhere out there was a magic potion that could grant eternal life, and he wasn't about to let this little detail called reality get in his way. Enter the alchemists, a ragtag bunch of proto-chemists and charlatans who promised to whip up immortality in a bottle, provided, of course, they were well compensated for their efforts. It's said that the emperor dispatched expeditions far and wide, even as far as the mythical Pinglai Island, a supposed realm of enlightened immortals. On one such wild goose chase, an alchemist named Zhu Fu was sent with a fleet of ships carrying 500 young men and women, tasked with bringing back the elixir. Spoiler alert, Zhu Fu never returned. Some historians speculate he might have ended up in Japan, choosing to ditch the quest and live out his days far from the emperor's reach. Talk about an escape plan. Back at home, Qin Shi Huang's court was bustling with alchemists tossing around mercury, lead, and arsenic like they were ingredients in a gourmet recipe. Now, in case your chemistry knowledge is a tad rusty, these elements are about as healthy as drinking lava. But in the emperor's mind, these potions were the path to eternal life. Ironically, they probably did more for his demise than his longevity. The emperor's health regimen included consuming these toxic brews, which likely contributed to his untimely death at the age of 49. Imagine that, desperately seeking immortality and instead fast-tracking your own mortality. Talk about the universe's brutal sense of humor. So why did Qin Shi Huang, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism, fall for the snake oil charm of immortality? Part of it was likely his obsession with control. He had conquered death in the political sense by forging an empire, and the idea of leaving it all behind must have been intolerable. Add to this the deeply ingrained cultural beliefs about immortality and the afterlife, and you've got a potent cocktail of ambition and fear. The emperor wasn't just building walls and tombs. He was trying to build a legacy that defied the very laws of nature. But here's where things get tragicomic. The emperor's relentless pursuit of eternal life had some unintended consequences that would have made even the gods chuckle. For one, the diversion of resources towards alchemical endeavors and expeditions strained the empire's economy. The costs were astronomical, with funds that could have been used to stabilize the newly unified empire being funneled into these fanciful quests. To put it bluntly, Qin Shi Huang was burning cash like it was going out of style, all in pursuit of a pipe dream. And then there's the empire itself, left teetering on the edge of chaos upon the emperor's death. His quest for immortality meant he never truly addressed the question of succession. When you're planning to live forever, the idea of grooming an heir tends to slip down the to-do list. So, when Qin Shi Huang unexpectedly shuffled off his moral coil, thanks in no small part to those lovely mercury cocktails, the empire was thrown into disarray. His death was kept a secret for weeks, as the court scrambled to decide who would take the reins. It said that the emperor's body was transported back to the capital, surrounded by carts of salted fish, to mask the smell of decay. Not exactly the dignified end one might expect for the first emperor. The power vacuum left in the wake of his demise sparked a series of political machinations that make Game of Thrones look like a kindergarten brawl. Qin Shi Huang's favored son, Fusu, was famously sidelined in favor of a younger, more pliable sibling, Huang, manipulated by the ambitious Chancellor Lai Si and the eunuch Zhao Gao. This was a classic case of palace intrigue, complete with forged edicts and a puppet ruler. The result, an empire that crumbled almost as quickly as it had been built, descending into civil war and chaos within a few short years. The Qin dynasty, which had seemed as solid as the Great Wall itself, lasted a mere 14 years after the emperor's death. The irony, of course, is palpable. Qin Shi Huang, the man who staked everything on being remembered for eternity, ended up with a legacy as much marked by the chaos of his death as by the grandeur of his life. His quest for immortality, driven by fear and ambition, only hastened the decline of the very empire he had worked so tirelessly to build. It's a narrative that captures the eternal human struggle between hubris and mortality, a tale as old as time, yet as fresh as the morning news. Qin Shi Huang's story is a powerful reminder of the pitfalls of unchecked ambition and the perils of seeking control over the uncontrollable. His reign, marked by incredible achievements and equally incredible failures, is a testament to the complexity of human nature. The first emperor of China was a man who dreamed of eternal life, but found himself ensnared by the mortality that binds us all. It's a story that continues to resonate, a cautionary tale about the limits of power and the inevitable march of time. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Qin Shi Huang's saga, it's clear that his life and legacy are as layered and complex as the empire he once ruled. From his audacious unification of China to his obsessive quest for immortality, Qin Shi Huang's reign was a whirlwind of ambition, innovation, and tragedy. There's still more to uncover in this historical epic, so stick around as we unravel the last threads of a story that's as fascinating as it is cautionary. With Qin Shi Huang's grand dreams unraveling faster than a cheaply made sweater, it's time to pick through the debris of his empire's collapse and see what treasures, or perhaps cautionary tales, are left behind. The death of the first emperor in 210 BC set off a chain reaction that would make a Rube Goldberg machine look straightforward. The seeds of chaos were sown long before his final breath, but they sprouted with impressive speed once he was out of the picture, surprising absolutely no one who had been paying attention. The immediate fallout was a masterclass in political skullduggery. With Qin Shi Huang gone, the court became a hotbed of intrigue. His son, Fusu, who might have been a competent successor, was elbowed out of the way faster than a Black Friday shopper. Instead, the throne was gifted to his younger son, Huang, thanks to the machinations of the Chancellor Lai Si and Zhao Gao, the power-hungry eunuch. Picture a political version of musical chairs, but with slightly higher stakes, like, say, the fate of an entire empire. Huang, posthumously known as Qin Shi, was about as effective a ruler as a chocolate teapot. Under his reign, the Qin dynasty crumbled faster than a stale cookie. He was a puppet ruler, manipulated by Zhao Gao, whose ambitions were as grand as they were destructive. Zhao Gao, the man who once convinced the court that a deer was a horse, literally, not metaphorically, was the one pulling the strings. This infamous incident, known as Zhao Gao's deer, became a symbol of political absurdity, where reality was twisted to suit the whims of those in power. If ever there was a time to wish for a fact-checking department, this was it. The economic strain on the empire didn't help matters. Qin Shi Huang's monumental projects had left the treasury as empty as a politician's promise. The heavy taxes and forced labor that funded these grandiose plans pushed the populace to its breaking point. When the emperor was alive, his iron grip kept rebellion at bay. But with him gone, the people's discontent erupted like a volcano, spewing rebellion across the land. The first major uprising was led by Chen Sheng, and Huang in 209 BC. Their rebellion, born out of frustration and desperation, snowballed into a full-blown peasant revolt. It was like a domino effect of dissent, as one uprising fueled another. The harshness of legalism, once the backbone of Qin's power, became its Achilles heel. The draconian laws that had kept the empire's subjects in line now sparked their defiance. It was a classic case of the oppressed becoming the oppressors. Only this time the oppressors were armed and very angry. By 206 BC, the Qin dynasty was officially toast. Liu Bang, a former peasant-turned-military leader, marched into the capital of Xianyang and declared the end of Qin rule. He would go on to establish the Han dynasty, a new era that learned from Qin's mistakes, or at least most of them. The Han dynasty embraced Confucian philosophy, softening the harsh edges of legalism while maintaining the centralized power structure Qin, Huang had pioneered. It was a bit like taking a sledgehammer to a sculpture and then sticking the pieces back together in a way that actually made sense. But let's not be too hasty in writing off Qin, Huang's legacy. Sure, his dynasty was short-lived, but his impact was anything but. His vision of a unified China laid the groundwork for the nation's future. The administrative and legal systems he established endured long after the dust settled on his tomb. Even his penchant for grand construction projects became a template for future emperors. The Great Wall, though not quite the tourist attraction it is today, became a symbol of China's enduring spirit and its ability to protect itself from outside threats, or at least give the illusion of it. The standardization efforts under Qin Shi Huang were nothing short of revolutionary. He unified weights and measures, standardized the written script, and even regulated axle lengths to ensure smooth travel on those meticulously constructed roads. These reforms weren't just about efficiency. They were about forging a unified identity out of a patchwork of cultures and dialects. It was an early exercise in nation-building, where the glue was a mix of innovation, coercion, and the occasional threat of execution. Culturally, Qin Shi Huang's legacy is a mixed bag, part marvel, part cautionary tale. His mausoleum, with its terracotta army, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, attracting millions of visitors each year. It's a testament to his ambition and the artistic achievements of his era. Yet, it also serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of his reign. The laborers who built these wonders paid a steep price, their stories buried alongside the emperor in a tomb that was as much a monument to power as it was a graveyard of lost lives. In the grand tapestry of history, Qin Shi Huang is a figure of both awe and admonition. His achievements were monumental, but so were his failures. The romanticized image of a great unifier glosses over the brutal realities of his rule, a regime that thrived on fear and suppression. Yet, without his unification, China might have remained a fractured land, its potential unrealized. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a spectrum of human ambition and folly, where the lines between hero and tyrant are often blurred. Today, Qin Shi Huang is a subject of endless fascination, his life and legacy dissected by historians and fictionalized in popular culture. He's a character as complex as any penned by Shakespeare, a man who dared to dream big and paid the price for it. His tale is a narrative of extremes, where the pursuit of immortality led to an early grave, and the quest for eternal legacy resulted in a fleeting dynasty, but a lasting impact. As we wrap up this saga, it's clear that Qin Shi Huang was a man of contradictions, a ruler whose ambitions soared as high as the mountains of his empire, but whose methods were as ruthless as the rivers he sought to control. His story serves as a mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle between power and morality, ambition and consequence. In the end, Qin Shi Huang leaves us with a lesson as enduring as the Great Wall itself, that the true measure of a legacy is not just in the monuments left behind, but in the stories that echo through history, the tales of triumph and tragedy, of vision and vanity, that remind us of the complex tapestry that is human nature. And so, the curtain falls on the tale of Qin Shi Huang, a saga that's as much a cautionary tale as it is a historical epic. It's a story that continues to captivate and educate, a reminder that the past, with all its grandeur and brutality, is never truly gone. It lives on in the lessons it imparts and the questions it leaves unanswered. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward the wisdom gleaned from its pages. ever mindful of the cost of ambition unchecked and the enduring power of a legacy forged in both greatness and folly.